6 months after my sister's wedding, my mother sat across from me at my kitchen table, slid a folder toward my coffee, and said, "This family has been falling apart since the wedding." Inside were reminders for my father's insurance renewal, an appointment he had already missed once, and a note about a repair company Mom had been trying to reach for 3 days. Olivia was not returning her calls. Dad had apparently forgotten 2 passwords. Mom looked exhausted, irritated, and genuinely confused about why none of those problems had somehow found their way into my hands. I pushed the folder back across the table. "Then you should probably start handling them." Her expression told me that answer still sounded unnatural to her. What she did not understand yet was that our family had not started falling apart at Olivia's wedding. That wedding was simply the first day I stopped holding everything together. Before I tell you how my sister managed to stop her own processional by locking me in a room, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me, because what happened after those ceremony doors stayed shut changed far more than one wedding. And if you enjoy stories about family secrets, betrayal, and finally drawing the line, subscribe to the channel and keep listening. The wedding had taken place on a humid Saturday near the end of August, at a restored estate outside Columbus, Ohio. From my place, it was a little over half an hour by car, which meant I had enough time during the drive to convince myself that I was actually looking forward to the day. Olivia and I had not been close in the effortless way sisters sometimes are, but the previous few months had felt better. Less defensive. Less like every family conversation came with an invisible scoreboard. When she had asked me to open the ceremony doors for her, I had been surprised enough to ask if she was sure. She had laughed and said, "You were always the one who got me where I needed to go, it feels right." I had carried that sentence around longer than I wanted to admit. The arrangement itself was simple. Mom would be with Olivia in the bridal suite and fix her veil before the procession. Dad would meet her at the far end of the hall and walk her down the aisle. I would stand just inside the double ceremony doors and open them when the coordinator gave me the signal. No speech. No announcement. No sentimental performance. It was one small job in a ceremony full of small jobs, but I understood what Olivia had meant when she gave it to me. When we were younger, getting her where she needed to go had been something I did so often that no one in our family had thought to name it. I was 6 years older than Olivia, which was enough of a gap to make me useful without making me old enough to understand how useful I was becoming. Our parents ran a restaurant, and during the busiest years they worked long days that stretched into evenings. They were not absent parents. They paid the bills, made the major decisions, went to school meetings when they could, and kept the household functioning. But once I was old enough to help, helping became normal very quickly. I made dinner when they were late. I sat with Olivia while she did homework. When I started driving, I picked her up after school and took her to dance practice often enough that I knew which intersection backed up on Tuesdays and which convenience store had the only sports drink she liked. I did not spend my childhood chained to responsibility, and I have never pretended I did. I had friends. I went out. I went to college. I complained when Olivia annoyed me, and sometimes I told my parents no. The problem was quieter than that. I became the person everybody expected to know what to do, and because I was good at knowing what to do, I rarely stopped to ask whether I should be the person doing it. For a long time, being capable felt almost identical to being loved. By the time I arrived at the estate that morning, the parking lot was already full of vendors, relatives, and wedding party cars. The air felt heavy enough to wear. Inside, everything smelled like flowers, hairspray, coffee, and the faint dustiness of an old building that had been polished into elegance without ever quite losing its age. Olivia was in the bridal suite in a silk robe, surrounded by garment bags, curling irons, makeup cases, and half-finished glasses of sparkling water. She looked beautiful and tense. She hugged me when I came in, but the hug was brief. "You're early," she said. "You asked me to be." "I know." She looked toward the mirror as Mom worked with one of the veil combs. "I'm glad you are." That was enough for me at the time. I put my bag in the corner and helped Hannah Cole move a box of programs out of the way. Hannah was our cousin and one of Olivia's bridesmaids, the sort of person who managed to be involved without making herself the center of anything. She had known both of us since childhood, although she was closer to Olivia in age. Madison Reed was on the other side of the suite, checking something on her phone while another bridesmaid fixed the back of her dress. Madison had been Olivia's closest friend since college. I knew how important she was to my sister, and I had never resented that. The first strange moment was so small that if everything after it had not happened, I probably would have forgotten it. Hannah noticed a little pouch near Olivia's shoes and laughed because one of the dance shoe straps inside had been secured with the same kind of emergency tape we used when Olivia was a teenager. That reminded me of the night Olivia had forgotten her dance shoes before a rehearsal and called me from the studio in tears. I had already been halfway home from work. I turned around, drove to our parents' house, found the shoes under her bed, and brought them across town. "You did that?" Hannah asked. "I complained the entire drive," I said. "So don't make me sound noble." Hannah smiled. "Still, you really were there for everything." I saw Olivia's eyes lift toward us in the mirror. Her hands stopped moving for a second. Then she reached up and adjusted the edge of her veil, even though Mom had just positioned it perfectly. I noticed the shift because Olivia's moods had been something I could read since she was little. I did not know what it meant. At the time, I assumed she was overwhelmed and did not want stories from childhood taking over her wedding morning. I let the subject die. That is important, because later Olivia would act as though I had spent the morning trying to remind everyone how much she owed me. I did not. I checked the time, asked the coordinator when she wanted me at the ceremony doors, and stayed out of the way. The coordinator told me I had about 20 minutes before the first processional cue. Dad had not yet come upstairs. Mom was still fussing with Olivia's veil. Everything looked exactly like the kind of controlled chaos every wedding seems to generate before it suddenly becomes quiet. About 10 minutes later, Olivia came over to me holding one side of her dress away from the floor. "Can you grab the emergency sewing kit?" she asked. "Where is it?" "In the supply room behind the bridal suite. I think it's on the second shelf." Black case. I nodded and went. The supply room was not a guest room. It was a narrow staff storage space tucked behind a short connecting hallway, full of folded linens, extra chair covers, boxes of candles, cleaning supplies, and spare decorations. The door had been open most of the morning because venue staff were still moving things in and out. I had seen the coordinator use it earlier. I stepped inside and scanned the shelves, looking for a black case. I found it almost immediately. Then the door shut behind me. At first, I thought Olivia had simply pulled it closed to get past someone in the hall. I picked up the sewing kit and reached for the handle. It did not turn. I tried again, harder, and heard the metal stop against the lock. "Olivia?" Nothing. I put the sewing kit down. "Olivia, open the door." Still nothing. There are moments when your body understands a situation a second before your mind accepts it. My fingers tightened around the handle. My shoulders went rigid. I looked at the door, then at the shelves, then back at the door, as if another exit might appear simply because the obvious one had stopped working. The supply room had no second door. There was a small high window that let in light but was never meant to be used as an exit. I pulled out my phone and called Olivia. She declined the call. That was when I stopped wondering whether the door had locked accidentally. I called again. This time it rang until voicemail. "Olivia," I said through the door, keeping my voice low, because I still believed there was a possibility she would open it and explain herself. "Whatever this is, open the door." My phone vibrated. A text from her. "Please don't make this harder. Madison is opening the doors. I need one day where things are about the people who actually showed up for me." I read it twice. For several seconds, I was not angry. Anger came later. My first reaction was disbelief, so clean that it almost felt calm. I looked at the sewing kit on the shelf and understood that Olivia had not sent me into that room because she needed thread. She had needed me somewhere I could not interfere while another person took my place. The sentence that hurt was not Madison is opening the doors. It was the people who actually showed up for me. I could have started pounding on the door. I could have called Mom. I could have called Dad. Instead, I looked at the time. The processional was supposed to begin in less than 2 minutes. Hannah had told me earlier that she would be waiting in the staging area near the entrance with the rest of the bridesmaids. If Olivia had replaced me with Madison, Madison would be standing there too. I texted Hannah. Olivia locked me in the supply room. She told Madison I stepped aside, didn't she? I watched the message change to delivered, then read. I sent one more. Ask Madison before those doors open. Hannah did not answer. From somewhere beyond the walls, muffled by old plaster and closed doors, the first notes of the processional music began. My heart started beating harder, but I did not pound on the door. I stood still with my phone in my hand and listened. The music continued for several seconds, soft and distant. Then it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The silence afterward felt enormous. Outside the supply room, I heard quick footsteps. Voices. One voice belonged to the coordinator. Another sounded like Hannah. Someone tried the handle from the other side. Jessica? Hannah called. I'm here. Oh my God. I'm fine. Get the key. There was movement again. Someone said the venue manager was coming. Through the wall, I could hear fragments from the main hallway. Guests shifting. People whispering. Chairs creaking. The ceremony had not started. The entrance doors were still closed. A minute later, maybe less, a key scraped into the lock. The deadbolt turned. The venue manager opened the door and stepped aside. Hannah was behind him, pale and furious. Madison stood farther down the hallway, no longer at the ceremony doors. The coordinator was speaking into her headset. Dad had appeared from the other direction, his face confused. Mom was beside Olivia, and Olivia was standing at the end of the hall in her wedding dress, veil in place, bouquet in her hands. For one strange second, everyone seemed to wait for me to decide what kind of scene this was going to become. I handed the sewing kit to the venue manager, because I was still holding it. Then I walked toward my sister. She looked away first. Did you lock me in there? I asked. Mom made a small motion toward me. Jessica? I kept my eyes on Olivia. Did you lock me in there? Olivia's jaw tightened. For 10 minutes, I needed you to stop. Dad stared at her. You locked your sister in a room? It wasn't like that. I almost laughed, but nothing about the moment was funny. It was a room. The door was locked. I was inside it. What part was different? Olivia's face flushed. I needed 10 minutes without you turning this into something. Turning what into something? Madison looked between us. The coordinator had gone very still. Hannah folded her arms. Olivia did not answer me. Mom stepped fully between us then, careful not to touch either of our dresses. Her voice dropped into the tone she had used my entire life whenever she believed the fastest solution was more important than the fairest one. Can we please get through today? I looked at her. Not are you okay? Not what happened. Not why did Olivia lock you in a supply room. Can we please get through today? And standing there in that hallway, with the processional music dead, the ceremony doors still closed, and my sister looking at me as though I had somehow created the problem by getting out, I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My mother was not asking whether I could forgive Olivia. She was asking whether I would do what I had always done. Absorb the problem. Keep everyone moving. Make sure the day still worked. For the first time in a very long time, I looked at the mess in front of me and did not automatically think, I've got it. For a few seconds after Mom asked whether we could please get through today. Nobody moved. The coordinator was still holding one hand near her headset, waiting for someone to tell her whether she was restarting a wedding or managing a family emergency. Dad looked from Olivia to me, as if he had missed the first half of a conversation and was trying to reconstruct it from our faces. Madison had stepped away from the ceremony doors completely. Hannah stood beside her with my text still open on her phone. Olivia was the only person who seemed impatient with the silence, which made something inside me go cold. I asked you a question, I said. What exactly did you need me to stop doing? Olivia shifted her bouquet from one hand to the other. You know what? No, I don't. You are making everything about the past again. I almost looked around to see whether anyone else understood what she meant, but I stopped myself. I had spent enough years checking other people's expressions before deciding whether my own reaction was reasonable. I told Hannah a story about driving you to dance practice. That was it. You always do that. Do what? Remind people. Remind them of what? Her mouth tightened. That you were there. That you did everything. That you were the responsible one. I stared at her because the accusation was so far from what I had thought was happening that morning that I needed a moment to absorb it. I had not arrived at her wedding planning to collect credit for a childhood that neither of us had chosen. I had come because she asked me to stand at a door and open it when she walked toward the person she was marrying. Until that hallway, I had actually believed the role meant she remembered some of those years with affection. Dad finally spoke. Olivia, you locked your sister in a room because she told Hannah she drove you to dance practice? When you say it like that, it sounds insane. It sounds insane because it happened, I said. Mom's eyes flashed toward me. Jessica, please. No. I kept my voice level. She put me in a locked storage room and texted me from the other side of the door. We are not going to solve that by pretending my tone is the problem. The coordinator glanced at the venue manager. Neither of them said anything, but their presence mattered. Olivia knew she was no longer explaining herself only to family members who could be pushed into smoothing things over. Madison had heard her admit the door was locked intentionally. Hannah had my message. Dad had just repeated the fact aloud. Whatever Olivia wanted to call it later, she could not turn it into an accidental latch without contradicting half the hallway. Olivia exhaled through her nose. I said it was 10 minutes. Dad's expression changed. That doesn't help. I needed 10 minutes without her turning this into something. You keep saying that, I said. What was I turning into something? She looked toward Madison, then away so quickly that I noticed it. That was the first moment I understood. Madison was not simply the replacement. She was part of the reason Olivia had replaced me. The coordinator stepped in before the silence stretched any further. I need to know how you want to proceed. We can restart in a few minutes, but we need a clear entrance plan. Mom seized on the practical question with visible relief. Yes, good. Let's do that. I looked at the coordinator. I'm not opening the doors. Mom's head snapped toward me. Jessica. I was removed from the role before I knew I'd been removed. I'm not stepping back into it now like nothing happened. Olivia laughed once without humor. So you're walking out? No. That stopped her. I could have left. In that moment, leaving would have felt clean. My car was 35 minutes from home, and nothing physically prevented me from walking through the lobby, crossing the parking lot, and spending the afternoon somewhere no one expected me to absorb anything. But I also understood exactly how the story would sound by dinner if I did. Jessica got upset because Madison mattered to Olivia. Jessica made a scene. Jessica left before the ceremony. Maybe by Monday I would have abandoned my sister on her wedding day. I had spent too much of my life assuming truth would defend itself. I'm staying for the ceremony, I said. I'm sitting where I was supposed to sit. I'm not opening the doors, and I'm not helping manage whatever happens next. Mom stared at me as if I had chosen the most complicated option available. Why stay if you're this angry? Because leaving is not the same thing as being removed, and I'm not giving anyone the chance to confuse those later. That landed harder than I expected. Olivia's eyes flicked toward me, and for the first time I saw something other than anger in her face. It was not guilt. It was calculation. She knew I had understood there was already a story forming around what she had done. The coordinator nodded. That's clear enough. We can do a standard entrance. The doors can be managed by staff. Madison immediately shook her head. I'm not doing it. Olivia turned to her. Madison, I'm not opening those doors. You already agreed. Madison looked at me before answering. I agreed because you told me Jessica wanted me to. That sentence changed the shape of the hallway more than anything that had happened since the lock clicked behind me. I turned fully toward Madison. What did she tell you? Madison hesitated, and I could see she was trying to decide whether answering me would make the situation worse. Eventually, she said, She told me you thought it would mean more if I did it. When? Olivia interrupted. We don't have time for this. I ignored her. Madison, when did she tell you? Wednesday, 3 days before the wedding. The anger I had not felt in the supply room arrived then, not as heat but as clarity. I had thought Olivia panicked that morning after hearing Hannah's comment. I had thought she made an impulsive, ugly decision because she did not want me standing in a symbolic place she suddenly regretted giving me. But Madison had been told 3 days earlier that I had already stepped aside. So this wasn't a last-minute change, I said. Olivia's shoulders stiffened. The role was never that serious. That's not what I asked. Mom rubbed her forehead. Can we talk about this after the ceremony? I looked at her. You knew Madison was doing it? She paused just long enough to answer me without words. Mom? I knew Olivia had changed her mind. Did you know Madison thought I agreed? That's not exactly how she explained it to me. Olivia cut in. Mom, stop. I filed that away because I did not have time to pull it apart in a hallway with guests waiting behind closed doors. What mattered then was simpler. Olivia had planned to replace me before that morning. She had lied to Madison about my consent. Then, when I remained physically present and still expected to do the job she had asked me to do, she found a way to make sure I could not reach the doors. The coordinator asked again if we were ready. Dad looked 20 years older than he had when I arrived. He lowered his voice and said, Jessica, I'm sorry. It was not enough, but it was at least directed at the right person. I know, I said. Go walk your daughter down the aisle. Mom's face tightened at the wording, but I did not soften it for her. Olivia was still her daughter. I was still Dad's daughter. Nothing that happened in that hallway required us to pretend otherwise. The ceremony restarted, about 15 minutes late. A member of the venue staff handled the doors. There was no special sister moment, no replacement performance with Madison, no symbolic little scene Olivia could later point to as proof of who had mattered most. The coordinator simplified the entrance because that was the easiest way to get the wedding moving again. And for once, I appreciated simplicity more than sentiment. I took my seat with the family instead of standing near the doors. The room was quiet except for the music and the soft movement of people turning toward the aisle. When the doors opened, Olivia appeared with Dad beside her. For 1 second, she looked directly at me. I did not smile. I also did not look away. She walked down the aisle, and the ceremony continued. That mattered to me more than I expected. Later, when people tried to reduce everything to whether I had ruined Olivia's wedding, I could remember the facts. She got married. The vows happened. The photographs happened. Guests ate dinner and danced. Nothing collapsed because I refused to pretend being locked in a room was harmless. The reception was where I discovered how deeply my family depended on me returning to normal faster than everyone else. About 20 minutes after dinner began, Mom came to my table with a folded seating card in her hand. One of the older relatives had been placed near a speaker and wanted to move. Normally, this was exactly the kind of thing Mom would hand me without even thinking. I knew which cousins could switch seats without caring. I knew where the empty chair was. I knew the fastest way to fix it. Jessica, Mom said quietly, can you take care of Aunt Linda? She can't hear where she is. I looked at the card. For a second, the old response rose automatically. I've got it. It was not even emotional. It was habit. My brain had already mapped the solution before I remembered the hallway. No, I said. Mom blinked. No? You'll need to handle that. It'll take you 5 minutes. I know. Her expression almost made me laugh. She looked less shocked by my refusal than she had looked by Olivia admitting she locked me in the supply room. You know where everyone is sitting. So do you. There's a seating chart near the coordinator. Jessica, don't do this tonight. I'm not doing anything. You know what I mean. Yes, I said. You mean don't make you solve a problem because I could solve it faster. She stared at me, then glanced toward the surrounding tables as if worried someone might hear. This isn't the time. That's fine. Then go move Aunt Linda. I did not say it cruelly. That was the strange part. I was not trying to punish Mom by leaving an elderly relative next to a loudspeaker. I simply refused to become the automatic fix. Mom ended up finding the coordinator, and Aunt Linda was moved within 10 minutes. No disaster. No ruined reception. The world survived my absence from one small problem. After Mom walked away, Hannah leaned toward me. That looked painful. It was educational. She gave me a sideways smile but did not push. I appreciated that more than sympathy. For most of the reception, I stayed at my table, spoke to relatives, ate dinner, and watched Olivia move through the room. She seemed determined to prove she was having the perfect evening. She laughed loudly with bridesmaids. She posed for photographs. She danced with Dad. Madison participated, but something had changed between them. She smiled when expected, yet she kept a little physical distance from Olivia that had not been there that morning. I might have left the wedding believing the whole thing would eventually be contained to the people in that hallway if I had not heard a conversation near the bar. One of our relatives, Aunt Denise, was talking to Olivia. I was close enough to hear because I was waiting for water. I thought Jessica was supposed to open the doors, Denise said. Did I remember that wrong? Olivia took a sip of champagne. Plans changed. Denise nodded, clearly uninterested in drama. Oh, Olivia added. Jessica decided it was better this way. I turned my head. That was all. 7 words. Jessica decided it was better this way. No mention of the locked door. No mention that I had entered the supply room still expecting to perform the role. No mention of Madison believing I had voluntarily stepped aside because Olivia told her so 3 days earlier. I could have corrected her right there. Instead, I picked up my water and went back to my table. That decision was not weakness. It was the first time I consciously understood the difference between refusing to lie and feeling obligated to correct every lie the second it left someone's mouth. I did not want a public confrontation at the bar. I also did not intend to forget the wording. Jessica decided it was better this way. By the end of the reception, I had heard a softer variation twice. They changed the plan. Jessica didn't mind. Each version moved a little farther from what had happened. I left earlier than I normally would have. I stayed through dinner, the cake cutting, and the formal dances, then gathered my bag. Mom noticed immediately. You're leaving? Yes. People will notice. That's okay. She lowered her voice. Can you at least say goodbye to Olivia? I already did. When? This morning before she locked me in the supply room. Mom closed her eyes. Jessica. I'm not making a scene, I'm going home. She looked tired then. Genuinely tired. And some old part of me wanted to make it easier for her. That instinct had always been strongest when Mom looked overwhelmed. I nearly said I would stay another hour. Instead, I kissed her cheek. Good night, Mom. I was almost through the ballroom doors when Madison called my name. She caught up with me in the hall. Can you wait? I stopped. I'm sorry, she said. Again, I really thought you knew. I believe you. She made it sound like the two of you talked about it. We didn't. Madison glanced back toward the ballroom. I need to ask her something before you go. You don't need me for that. I think I do. I should have walked away. I had already stayed longer than I wanted. But there was something in her face that told me she had spent the entire reception replaying Wednesday's conversation. Olivia came into the hall a minute later, still holding one side of her dress off the floor. Her expression changed when she saw the two of us together. What now? Madison did not ease into it. Why did you tell me Jessica volunteered? Olivia looked at me first. That mattered. I told you why, she said. No, you told me Jessica thought it would mean more if I opened the doors. Olivia shifted her attention back to Madison. Because I knew you'd make it a bigger deal if I told you she didn't want to give it up. I frowned. You never asked me to give it up. This is exactly what I mean, Olivia said. Everything has to become a hearing with you. Madison shook her head. That isn't an answer. Olivia looked tired now too, but unlike Mom's exhaustion, hers did not pull sympathy out of me. Fine, because if I'd told you the truth, you would have made it a bigger deal than it was. Madison stared at her. I did too. There it was, stripped of all the wedding language and all the claims about emotion. Olivia had lied because the truth would have created resistance. She had told Madison I volunteered, because Madison might have questioned replacing me otherwise. She had let me believe I was still opening the doors because I might have objected. When neither lie was enough to make the morning proceed exactly as she wanted, she locked me somewhere I could not reach the ceremony. and as I stood there listening to her defend it, I realized the 10 minutes in that supply room were not the real betrayal. The real betrayal was that Olivia had already begun deciding which version of me each person needed to believe. 2 days after the wedding, I sat at my dining table with my phone, a legal pad, and the growing suspicion that if I did not write down exactly what had happened, I was going to spend the next 6 months being told it had happened differently. I was not building a case. I was not planning to expose Olivia or send screenshots to relatives. I simply knew my family well enough to recognize how quickly uncomfortable events became softer after enough retellings. By Sunday night, Mom had already referred to the ceremony delay as that unfortunate confusion. By Monday morning, Aunt Denise apparently believed I had decided not to participate in the entrance. Those descriptions were not technically identical, but they were moving in the same direction. I wrote down the basic sequence while I still remembered it clearly. Olivia sent me into the supply room, the door locked. She declined my call. She texted that Madison would open the doors and that she wanted one day centered on the people who had actually shown up for her. I texted Hannah. The music stopped. Venue staff opened the room. In the hallway, Olivia admitted she had locked me in for 10 minutes. Madison said Olivia had told her on Wednesday that I volunteered to step aside. Later, I heard Olivia tell Aunt Denise that I had decided the change was better that way. Seeing the versions beside each other bothered me more than I expected. They were not wild lies. That was what made them effective. Olivia was not claiming I had attacked her or sabotaged the ceremony. She was shaving away small pieces of what happened until the remaining story served her better. I had learned in my career that the most dangerous errors were often not dramatic enough to trigger immediate alarm. A change date. A missing approval. One sentence omitted from a meeting summary. By the time someone noticed the pattern, everyone was arguing over details instead of asking who benefited from the change. Dad called while I was still looking at the page. I almost let it go to voicemail, not because I was angry at him specifically, but because I knew the tone he would use. Dad had a way of sounding reasonable that made unreasonable requests feel embarrassing to reject. He did not demand peace. He presented peace as the obvious destination and waited for everyone else to explain why they were still standing in the road. I answered anyway. "Hey, Dad, got a minute?" "I have a minute," he sighed. "I talked to your sister. I assumed you would. She's embarrassed." I looked at the notes in front of me. About locking me in the supply room? About everything. That wasn't my question. There was a pause. Yes, about that too. Dad had always been easier to speak to when I stayed precise. Broad emotional questions made him retreat behind phrases like everybody was upset or nobody handled it perfectly. Specific questions gave him fewer exits. What did she tell you happened? Jessica. I'm asking because I've already heard 3 versions. He went quiet again. Finally he said, "She said she changed the entrance because you were upset about Madison." I leaned back in my chair. "I wasn't upset about Madison. That's what she felt. That's not what you said. You said she told you I was upset." Dad exhaled. "Fine. That's what she told me." I wrote it down. He heard the pen. "Are you taking notes?" "Yes." "For what? So, when this becomes something else next week, I don't start wondering whether I imagined it. You don't need to make this into an investigation. I'm not investigating anything. I'm recording what people are telling me." He did not like that distinction. "Olivia admitted she locked the door," he said after a moment. I heard her say it. "I'm not pretending that didn't happen." That mattered. I stopped writing. "Thank you. But I don't think she understood how serious it would look." I closed my eyes. There it was. "Dad," she put a key in a lock. "I know." She declined my call. "I know." She texted me from the other side of the door. "I know." So what part did she not understand? I'm not defending it. You are adding explanations before anyone asked for one. He did not answer immediately, and I knew I had hit the edge of what he was willing to examine. "I just don't want this to become the thing that destroys your relationship," he said. I looked toward the window. Traffic moved along the street below my apartment, ordinary and indifferent. Then Olivia probably shouldn't have used our relationship as the reason to lock me in a room. That's not what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. You want me to separate what she did from what it says about how she sees me. She was emotional. It was her wedding. And I'm supposed to assume that makes her honest? Dad sighed again. I'm asking you not to go nuclear. The phrase irritated me enough that I laughed. Dad, I went home early. I haven't called relatives. I haven't posted anything. I haven't even sent Mom the screenshots. What exactly counts as nuclear to you? You know what I mean. No. I think what you mean is that you're worried I might stop absorbing this quietly. That ended the useful part of the conversation. Dad said he loved me. I said I loved him too. Both things were true. Love was not the problem. After we hung up, I went downstairs to get coffee because I had spent too much of the morning staring at my own handwriting. The place near my or are we haver we chow or are we day to sleazes? Are we towsen, are we haver bottle of maple syrup and a little metal rack of jam packets? I remembered a night I had not thought about in years. Olivia had been 12. She had been in some kind of dance showcase, not one of the important competitions but important enough to her that she had spent a week talking about it. She made one mistake halfway through the routine. I barely noticed. But she knew exactly where it happened and convinced herself everyone else did too. By the time the show ended, she had cried off most of her makeup. Mom and Dad were at the restaurant. I had been 19 and tired after a long day, but Olivia would not go home. She said everyone from dance was going somewhere afterward, and she could not stand the idea of seeing them. So I took her to a 24-hour diner instead. She sat across from me in stage makeup, an oversized sweatshirt and sweatpants over her costume, stabbing a pancake she was not eating. I embarrassed myself, she said. You missed half a turn. It was a full turn. Then I guess the Olympics are going to withdraw your medal. She glared at me. I stole a piece of her pancake. You're annoying. You'll survive. She eventually started laughing, which was the point. There had been nothing sacrificial about that night. I was not secretly angry that Mom and Dad were working. I was not keeping score. I loved my sister. Taking her for pancakes felt like being exactly where I wanted to be. Near the end of the meal, Olivia grew quiet again. Are you ever going to leave me? At 19, I had no idea what to do with a question like that, so I turned it into a joke. You couldn't get rid of me if you tried. She smiled. For years, that was all the memory had been. One sweet, ridiculous night with my little sister. Sitting in the coffee shop 2 days after her wedding, I heard the question differently. Are you ever going to leave me? I did not suddenly decide that everything Olivia had done was the product of childhood trauma. That would have been too convenient for both of us. Plenty of people are hurt and do not lock someone in a supply room. But I began to understand that the phrase she had used on her wedding day, the people who actually showed up for me, had a history much older than Madison. It also had a contradiction. Because I had shown up? A lot. Which meant the only way Olivia's newer story worked was if the years before I moved away somehow stopped counting. That afternoon I remembered another image, but not enough of it to be useful. I was 22, standing in my old bedroom with boxes on the floor. Olivia was 16. She was in the doorway with her arms crossed. I remembered her face. I remembered saying something about the job. Then I remembered Olivia saying, "Just go." That was it. Just go. For years I had filed those words under anger. My teenage sister was angry I was leaving, and I left anyway. The memory had always carried a thin layer of guilt that I rarely touched because there was no point. I had taken the job. I had moved. Whatever Olivia felt about it belonged to a decision I had already made. 2 days after her wedding, though, the fragment stayed with me. Just go. I could not remember what came immediately before or after it. I did not force it. Memory gets unreliable when you start interrogating it too aggressively, and I had no interest in inventing a kinder version of my past just because Olivia was inventing a harsher one. She texted me that evening. Can we talk without Mom and Dad? I stared at the message for a while. Then I answered, yes. We met the next day at a cafe about 15 minutes from my apartment. I chose a public place not because I was afraid of her, but because neutral ground seemed smarter. I arrived first. Olivia came in wearing jeans, a white blouse, and the wedding ring she kept twisting around her finger as she walked toward the table. She looked exhausted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Madison is barely talking to me." "That sounds like something you should talk to Madison about." I did. "And?" "She thinks I used her." I waited. Olivia leaned back. "You're not going to say anything?" "What do you want me to say?" "That she's overreacting." "I don't think she is." Her eyes narrowed. "Of course you don't." I had promised myself before she arrived that I would not chase every accusation. "Why did you ask me here?" She rubbed her thumb over her ring. "Because I need you to understand why I did it. I understand what you did." "That's not the same thing." "No, it isn't." She looked out the window for a second before speaking. "You were doing it again." "Doing what?" "Making everyone think you were the one who took care of me." Hannah asked about dance practice. "That's how it starts." I actually stared at her. "How? What starts?" "People telling stories about how you drove me everywhere, how you made dinner, how you helped with school, like I was some helpless kid you raised. I have never said I raised you. You don't have to." "Then who does?" "Everybody." That answer surprised me, because there was real anger behind it. But the anger was not pointed at one incident. It was old. I leaned forward slightly. "Olivia, if relatives exaggerate things, tell them they're exaggerating. Don't rewrite my part of your childhood. You always say it like you had a part." "I did." She looked away. "Not all of it," I continued. "Not even most of it. Mom and Dad were our parents, but I was there. That's what you don't understand." "Then explain it." She was quiet long enough that I thought she might leave. Instead, she said, "Do you know what it felt like when you left?" The question landed differently than anything else she had said. "I was 22. I know how old you were. You were 16. I know that too. Then what are you asking me?" She finally looked at me. Her eyes had gone bright, but she did not cry. "I know how old you were now. I didn't know how old you were then." I did not answer immediately. She went on. "You were just my sister to you. To me, you were the person who knew where everything was. You knew when I needed to leave for rehearsal. You knew which teacher I hated. You knew when Mom was too stressed to ask something, and when Dad was going to forget because he was exhausted. Then one day you were packing boxes. That hurt because it was not false. I had a job. I know. I couldn't stay home forever. I know. Then what did you want me to do?" "That's the problem." Her voice sharpened. "You keep asking like I'm accusing you of committing a crime by leaving. I'm telling you it hurt." He sat back. She was right about that part. I had been so prepared to defend the reasonableness of leaving at 22 that I had almost answered a question she was not asking. Olivia did not have to believe I was wrong for going in order to have felt abandoned by it. "I'm sorry it hurt," I said. Something in her face loosened. Then she ruined the moment. "But you don't get to spend the rest of our lives reminding everyone how much you did before you left." I felt the door between us close again. "I don't." "You do." "How?" "You walk into a room and everyone immediately knows you're the responsible one." "That isn't something I say." "You don't have to say it. Mom calls you when something goes wrong. Dad asks you to fix things. Aunt Denise tells stories about how mature you always were. Everybody looks at me like I was the difficult one you had to manage." "Were you difficult?" She glared. "So was I said. "We were kids. You don't get it." "Then tell me." She leaned toward me. "I hate when people—" There it was. Not abandonment alone. Credit. Ownership. "You think I want credit for your life? I think you like being the one everyone needs." That one hit closer than I wanted. I did not answer immediately, which Olivia noticed. She gave a bitter little smile. "See? No, I'm thinking." "About what?" "About whether there's some truth in that." She seemed unprepared for the answer. I continued before she could use it as proof of something larger. "I like being competent. I like knowing I can solve things. There have probably been times I helped because it was easier than waiting for someone else to do it. That doesn't mean I invented the years I drove you places." "I didn't say you invented them. You tell people we were never close." Her expression shifted. "Madison told me." "That's between me and Madison." "No, Olivia. You made me the subject. That makes at least part of it my business. She folded her arms. I watched her and understood something else. Olivia wanted two things that could not comfortably coexist. She wanted the right to say I had abandoned her, but she also wanted the years before I left to have been meaningless. If we had never been close, then why would my leaving matter? If I had been important enough to hurt her by going, then she had to admit I had been there before I went. I did not point that out yet. Instead, I asked, "Why, Madison? What do you mean? Why did she need to open the doors? She's my best friend." "I know. Why did that require removing me?" Olivia's expression hardened. "Because she showed up for me. So did I. You left. I grew up. You left. And Madison met you years later. She stayed." The simplicity of that sentence told me more than a long explanation would have. For Olivia, presence had become loyalty, and leaving had become betrayal. It did not matter why someone left. It did not matter whether they had a right to leave. The person who stayed won. I looked at her wedding ring, then back at her. "You locked me in a room to create a picture where Madison replaced me. That's not what I did. It is literally what you did. I wanted one moment that reflected my life now. Then you could have told me you changed the role. You would have argued. I might have asked why. Exactly. That's not the same thing. To you." I sat there for a while, listening to the clatter of cups behind the counter and a blender grinding ice somewhere near the register. I had wanted an explanation. I had one now. It was not good enough to excuse her, but it was coherent enough to scare me. Olivia had not locked me away because she hated me. She had locked me away because my presence contradicted a story she needed. That made the lie more durable, not less. "I'm not asking you to treat me like I raised you," I said. "I didn't." She looked skeptical. "I'm asking you not to tell people I was never there. You left. You keep saying that as if both things can't be true." She went quiet. I finished my coffee. When we stood to leave, she did not hug me. Neither did I try. At the door, she said, "Madison has been more of a sister to me than you have in years." I nodded. Maybe she has been. That still doesn't make the years before her disappear. Olivia walked out without answering. That evening, Madison called me. I considered not picking up. The last thing I wanted was to form some strange alliance with my sister's best friend against her. Madison had her own relationship to sort out with Olivia. I did not want ownership of that, too. But I answered, "I won't keep bothering you," she said immediately. "I just need to make sure I understood something." "Okay. When did you move away?" "When I was 22. Olivia was 16. There was silence. 16? "Yes." "She was in high school?" "Yes." Another pause. I always thought she was younger. "How much younger?" "I don't know." 13, maybe." I sat down. "Did she tell you she was 13? "No." Madison sounded careful. "I don't want to say she gave me an exact age if she didn't. It was the way she told it. She said you left as soon as you could, that she learned really young not to rely on family, that after that she basically handled herself. I guess I filled in the age. That distinction mattered, and I respected Madison for making it. She was 16, I said. And I didn't disappear. I moved for work. I came home. I called. We weren't as close afterward, but I didn't vanish." Madison took a breath. "She made it sound like you two were never close." I looked at the legal pad still sitting on my dining table. The diner. Dance practice. Homework. Arguments over bathroom time. Late-night movies. The question over pancakes. "Are you ever going to leave me?" My half-memory of Olivia standing in my bedroom doorway when I packed. "Just go." "She told you we were never close?" "Not in one sentence," Madison said. "That's what I'm realizing." "She told me pieces. You were always busy. You wanted out. You weren't interested in family. She said you left the first chance you got. I put the pieces together, and the picture you got was that I barely showed up." "Yes." I closed my eyes. Madison was quiet for a moment before saying, "Jessica, she didn't tell me you were close and then you left." I knew what was coming before she finished. She told me you were never really close at all. After we hung up, I stayed at the table for a long time. For the first time since the wedding, I stopped asking why Olivia had locked me in that room. I understood that part now. The question that scared me was how many years she had spent building a version of our childhood where there had never been anything worth locking me out of in the first place. By the beginning of September, I had stopped expecting anyone in my family to volunteer a complete version of what had happened at the wedding. Dad acknowledged that Olivia had locked the supply room. Madison knew she had been lied to about my supposedly giving up the ceremony role. Mom kept calling the whole thing a misunderstanding, which was impressive considering there had been very little misunderstanding involved. Olivia knew exactly where I was. I knew exactly why the door would not open. Madison knew exactly what she had been told. The only thing still unclear was how many people had known in advance that I was being replaced. Before I asked Mom, I took care of one practical detail. I emailed the wedding venue. I kept the message short and deliberately boring. I gave the date, my name, Olivia's name, and the approximate time the processional had been paused. I explained that I had been inside the secure supply room behind the bridal suite when the door was locked, and that venue staff had opened it shortly before the ceremony. I was not threatening legal action. I was not asking them to investigate Olivia. I simply wanted written confirmation of the incident and the approximate timeline for my own records. The venue manager replied the next afternoon. His message was exactly what I wanted, because it was almost aggressively neutral. The coordinator had been informed that a guest was unable to exit the secure supply room. The manager had opened the room using the venue's spare key. The processional had been paused while the issue was resolved. The incident occurred shortly before the scheduled start of the ceremony. There was no accusation, no dramatic language, no statement about who had locked the door. Just 4 facts. I saved the email. Then I closed it. At that point, I still had no plan to show it to anyone. The fact that I felt better having it told me something uncomfortable about my family. I had reached the point where I trusted a venue manager's 3-paragraph email more than I trusted our ability to remember the same event honestly for a month. Mom invited me to lunch 3 days later. She chose a quiet restaurant about halfway between my apartment and my parents' house. That was typical of her when she wanted to have what she considered a serious conversation. She disliked discussing family problems at home because home made them feel too real. A neutral table with polished silverware and strangers nearby gave her a reason to keep her voice low. When I arrived, she already had water and iced tea in front of her. "You look tired," she said. "Work's busy. You're sleeping?" "Yes." "Eating?" "I'm sitting in a restaurant." She gave me the faintest smile. "You know what I mean." "I do." For a few minutes, we stayed with safe topics. Dad was annoyed about a refrigeration repair at the restaurant. One of Mom's friends had a knee replacement scheduled. A cousin had apparently changed jobs. I let her talk because I knew she had not invited me there to discuss any of those things. Eventually, she folded her napkin beside her plate. "I don't like what's happening with you and Olivia." I took a sip of water. "Neither do I." She says Madison barely speaks to her. "That's between Olivia and Madison. You know why it's happening. I know what started it." Mom looked at me carefully. "There's a difference." "Yes." I waited. She had spent most of my life being better at silence than the rest of us. If Mom wanted someone to fill uncomfortable space, she simply stopped talking and looked patient. When I was younger, I would rush to explain myself. By 37, I had learned that silence worked both ways. She finally said, "I think Olivia made a terrible decision." That was new. "What part?" Mom frowned. "Do we have to do this like an interrogation?" I asked what you mean. "The door. Locking you in there." "Okay. She should never have done that." "I agree. But I also think things had been building for a long time." There it was. I set down my glass. "Did you know Madison was going to open the ceremony doors?" Mom's face changed just enough. I knew before she answered. I knew Olivia wanted her to. "That wasn't my question." "Yes," she said. "I knew." "How long?" "I don't remember." "Before the wedding day?" "Yes." "Before Wednesday?" She looked annoyed. "Jessica, I don't keep a calendar of every conversation I have with your sister. I'm not asking for a transcript. I'm asking whether you knew before Olivia told Madison." I knew Olivia was reconsidering the entrance. I watched her. Did you know Madison thought I had agreed? Mom picked up her fork and moved a piece of lettuce she had no intention of eating. I knew Olivia had told her the change was settled. That's not the same answer. She didn't give me the wording. Mom, what? Did you know Madison believed I had voluntarily stepped aside? She looked toward the window. That was when I understood she had. Yes, she said finally. I knew Madison thought you were okay with it. I leaned back in my chair. For some reason, that hurt differently than learning. Olivia had planned the switch 3 days before the wedding. Olivia and I were in open conflict now. I expected her to protect her version of events. Mom had spent the entire wedding day presenting herself as the person trapped between 2 daughters who had created a mess she desperately wanted to contain. She had not been trapped between us. She had known one of us was being lied about. What did you think was going to happen when I walked to the doors and Madison was standing there? Mom sighed. I thought Olivia was going to talk to you. When? She said she would handle it. Before or after the processional started? Jessica, I'm serious. I assumed before. And when she didn't? I didn't know she hadn't until everything happened. That part, at least, sounded plausible. Mom had been with Olivia, moving in and out of the bridal suite, fussing with the veil, and speaking to relatives. It was entirely possible she believed Olivia would tell me at some point before the entrance. Did you know she was going to lock me in the supply room? Mom's head came up immediately. Absolutely not. I believed her. The speed of the answer mattered. So did the anger. If I had known that, I would have stopped her. I think you would have too. Mom looked relieved for half a second, probably because she mistook my agreement for absolution. I continued. But you did know she was replacing me. You knew Madison had been told I agreed, and you never told me. Her relief disappeared. I was trying not to make the morning worse. For whom? For everyone. No. For Olivia. That isn't fair. It's accurate. Mom shook her head. You weren't the one getting married. So? So she was under enormous pressure. I stared at her. Mom must have heard herself because she immediately softened her tone. I'm not saying that excuse is what happened. You keep saying that right before you explain why it happened. That's not the same thing. It feels remarkably similar from this side of the table. Our food arrived then, giving both of us a few minutes to stop. The server set down my sandwich and Mom's salad, asked if we needed anything else, and smiled as though we were 2 women having an ordinary lunch. Mom waited until he walked away. I knew you would handle it better, she said. I looked at her. What? You're different from Olivia. How? You always have been. That still isn't an answer. She put down her fork. You're stronger. The word landed with an exhaustion I had not expected. Mom had been calling me strong since I was a teenager. Strong when Dad worked late and dinner still needed making. Strong when Olivia had a meltdown and Mom asked me to talk to her because she listens to you. Strong when I went away to college and did not call home crying. Strong when I got my first job. Strong when something broke, someone forgot something, or a family dinner went sideways and I fixed it before anyone had to ask twice. For years, I had heard the word as praise. Sitting across from Mom, I heard the hidden sentence underneath it. You can take more. You keep saying I was strong like strength meant I needed less from you. Her face tightened. That isn't what I meant. Then what did you mean? I meant I could trust you. To do what? To understand. Understand what? That sometimes Olivia needed more. More what? Patience, reassurance, attention. And I needed less? You didn't ask for as much. I almost laughed. Mom, I was a teenager. So was I once. That doesn't answer anything. Her eyes hardened. You're making it sound like we abandoned you. I didn't say that. You keep bringing up all these things you did for Olivia like your father and I weren't there. I haven't said that either. Then what are you saying? I leaned forward. I'm saying you were our parents. You paid for the house. You handled school. You handled doctors. You made the decisions. You worked more hours than I understood at the time. All of that is true. Mom's shoulders loosened slightly. I continued. And it's also true that there were years when I regularly got home and figured out dinner because you and Dad were still at the restaurant. It's true that I sat with Olivia while she did homework. It's true that once I was driving, I picked her up and took her to dance several times a week. It's true that if she was panicking about something and neither of you could leave work, I was usually the person who answered the phone. We were trying to keep the restaurant alive. I know. You say that like it's a footnote. We had payroll, rent, suppliers, employees who depended on us. There were years when one bad month could have finished us. I believe you. We weren't out having fun while you were home. I know. Then why are you acting like we chose this? Because having a good reason does not make the work disappear. Mom stopped. I had not planned the sentence. It came out before I could polish it. We were doing the best we could, she said. I believe that too. Her eyes narrowed as if she was waiting for the accusation after it. I did not give her one. That's the part you don't understand, I said. I don't need you to have been terrible parents for some of it, to have been too much for me. Mom looked down at the table. I don't know what you want me to say. I'm not asking for a confession. It feels like you are. I'm asking you to stop using the fact that you had reasons as proof there were no consequences. She was silent. The old version of me would have rescued her from that silence. I would have said I understood. I would have reminded her how hard she worked. I would have added that I turned out fine. I did understand. She had worked hard. I had turned out fine. But none of those facts required me to make the conversation comfortable. Mom eventually pushed her salad away. This is exactly why Olivia gets so upset. I looked at her. What is? You talk about these years like they explain her? I'm talking about me. To you. That makes no sense. It does to her. I waited. Mom rubbed her fingers together, a nervous habit she usually disguised by adjusting jewelry. Olivia has spent years hearing relatives tell stories about you taking her places, helping her, making sure she had what she needed. She hates it. I know that now. She thinks people use those stories to make you responsible for everything she became. I don't. That's not the point. It is if she's locking me in rooms over it. Mom closed her eyes briefly. She feels like every accomplishment comes with an asterisk. Olivia did well in school, but Jessica helped with homework. Olivia stayed with dance, but Jessica drove her. Olivia became independent, but Jessica was there first. I stared at Mom because I had never heard Olivia's resentment explained so clearly. Did she tell you that? Not in one conversation. There was the phrase again. Not in one sentence. Not in one conversation. That was how Olivia's version of our childhood had apparently been built. Not through one giant lie, but through dozens of small interpretations repeated until they hardened, Mom continued. She thinks you don't realize how people talk about you. How do they talk about me? Like you were the responsible one. I was responsible. You know what I mean. No, I know what you mean now. She looked wary. They weren't just calling me responsible, I said. They were making Olivia feel like she owed me. Mom hesitated. Yes. And instead of telling them she didn't owe me anything, she decided the easiest solution was to pretend I wasn't there. I don't think she consciously decided that. Maybe not at first. Mom did not argue. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something close to sympathy for Olivia that did not require me to excuse her. I could understand why it would be maddening to hear your childhood narrated through someone else's competence. I could understand wanting to own your own adulthood. If every success became another story about how your older sister helped you, gratitude could start feeling like debt. But Olivia had crossed a line between saying, I did not become who I am because of Jessica, and saying, Jessica was never there. One protected her identity. The other erased mine. Why didn't you ever correct it? I asked. Correct what? When Olivia started telling people we were never close. Mom looked at me. Madison thought Olivia was around 13 when I moved away, I said. She thought I left as soon as I could and basically disappeared. Madison wasn't around then. That's exactly why Olivia's version mattered. Mom shook her head. I never heard Olivia say you disappeared. Did you hear her say she practically raised herself? Mom did not answer. Did you? Yes. And? I thought it was an exaggeration. Did you tell her that? She was an adult, Jessica. I wasn't going to police every story she told. But you were willing to let Madison believe I voluntarily gave up my role at the wedding because correcting that would upset Olivia. That's not fair. It is the same pattern. Mom's mouth tightened. I knew then that I had reached the point where continuing would only produce repetition. Mom was not going to suddenly admit she had spent years protecting Olivia's version of things because it protected her too. I was not even sure she understood that yet. What she did understand was that I had always been easier to disappoint. That realization hurt more than I wanted it to. Not easier because she loved me less. Easier because I usually recovered without making recovery someone else's problem. The check came. Mom reached for it automatically, and I let her pay because turning lunch into a symbolic fight over $30 would have been ridiculous. Outside, the September air was still warm enough that it did not feel like fall. We walked toward our cars together. Mom seemed calmer, as if she believed the difficult part was over. Then she said, "Since I have you here, can I ask you something?" I nearly smiled. "Sure. Your father has a contractor coming tomorrow to look at that leak by the back porch. We're both going to be at the restaurant. Could you meet him?" There it was. No transition. No awareness of the irony. Just another problem moving toward me because I was standing nearby. "What time?" "Between 10 and noon. I'm working. You work from home Thursdays." "Sometimes. It would only take a few minutes." I felt my hand move toward my bag before I knew why. My parents' spare house key was on my key ring. I had carried it for years. It had been given to me for emergencies, then slowly expanded to cover deliveries, contractors, forgotten documents, plants, packages, repair technicians, and anything else that required someone reliable to be physically present. Mom saw me touch the bag and assumed I was agreeing. "His name is Greg. Dad already explained the problem. You just have to let him in." I stopped. "No." Mom blinked. "What?" "I can't do it. You just said you're sometimes home." "I said I sometimes work from home. I didn't say I'm available to wait at your house for a contractor. It's 2 hours at most. Then Dad can schedule him for a time when one of you is there." Mom stared at me. "Jessica, they're booked for weeks. Then Dad should probably keep the appointment." "How?" "By being there. He has work. So do I." The silence between us felt different from the one at lunch. This was not about childhood. This was not about Olivia. This was a practical request happening in real time. And suddenly all the theory we had discussed over salad had become inconvenient. Mom crossed her arms. "You've done this before." "I know. So why is it a problem now?" "Because I don't want to do it." "That's it?" "Yes." She looked genuinely offended. "You're refusing just to make a point." "No, if I were making a point, I'd agree and then complain for an hour about how nobody values my time. I'm saying no because I'm working. You know your father can't just leave the restaurant. He can reschedule the contractor or arrange for someone else." "Who?" I nearly answered. That was my reflex. Mom asked a question, and my brain started building solutions. Call the neighbor. Move the appointment. Ask one of Dad's employees. See whether the contractor could come before the restaurant opened. I could solve it, probably in under 5 minutes. Instead, I stopped myself. "I don't know." Mom stared at me as if I had answered in another language. "You always know." That was the problem. Then this will be good practice for everybody. Her expression hardened. "You're still angry." "Yes." "At all of us?" "I'm angry at Olivia for locking me in a room. I'm angry at you for knowing she had lied to Madison and saying nothing. But this isn't revenge. It feels like it. Because you're used to my help. That isn't fair. You keep saying that whenever I describe something you don't like." Mom looked away toward the parking lot. I softened my voice, but not the boundary. "Call Dad. Tell him I can't be there." She nodded once, sharply. "I will." I got into my car and sat there without starting it. The spare key was still in my bag. For a second, I considered going back. Not because Mom had convinced me. Because the solution was easy. I could move a morning meeting, bring my laptop, sit at their kitchen table, answer emails, let the contractor in, explain the leak, lock up, and leave. Nobody would suffer. Dad would not lose work time. Mom would not have to rearrange anything. It would take 2 hours. Maybe less. That was how it always worked. No single request was outrageous. No single favor ruined my life. They accumulated because I could handle each one. I started the car and drove home. Dad texted me later that evening. Your mom says you can't meet the contractor. No problem. I moved some things around. That was all. No catastrophe. No guilt. No emergency. The next afternoon, Mom called. I almost did not answer, but I was curious. Everything okay? The contractor came. Good. Your father had to leave the restaurant for an hour and a half. I'm sure that was inconvenient. He handled it. I waited. Mom did not say anything else about the contractor. Then she asked, "Do you still have our spare key?" I looked at the small brass key on the ring beside my laptop. Yes. Good. Just checking. She changed the subject. At the time, I thought the question meant nothing. Months later, I understood why I remembered it. The key had always been described as something I carried in case my parents needed me. Nobody had ever asked whether I still wanted the job that came with it. Before we hung up, Mom returned to the wedding one last time. I really am sorry about what Olivia did. I believed that she meant it. But I hope eventually you understand why I trusted you to handle all of this differently. There was that word again. Trusted. It sounded almost beautiful if I did not look too closely. What does that mean? You're capable, Jessica. You always have been. After the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment and looked at the spare key beside my hand. For most of my life, whenever my mother called me capable, I heard love. That afternoon, for the first time, I wondered how often she had actually meant capacity. For the next several weeks, nothing dramatic happened, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. There was no family meeting, no explosive phone call, no new betrayal waiting in my inbox. There were only small requests, the kind I had answered almost without noticing for years. Mom texted to ask whether I could make the reservation for Uncle Ray's birthday because I knew which place everyone liked. Dad forwarded me a renewal reminder from his insurance company with nothing in the message except, "Can you look at this?" Mom called because she could not remember which contractor had repaired the back stairs 2 summers earlier. None of those requests sounded outrageous on their own. That was what made them so easy to accept. The first time Mom asked me to book the birthday dinner, I actually opened the restaurant website before I stopped myself. I knew Uncle Ray liked quieter places because his hearing had gotten worse. I knew Aunt Denise would complain if parking was difficult. I knew Dad would want somewhere that did not require a deposit for a large table because he hated being charged before he had eaten anything. Within 30 seconds, I had already narrowed the options to 2 restaurants and was checking availability for 12 people. Then I looked at the text again. "Can you just book something for Saturday the 18th? You're better at this." I closed the browser. "You can handle it," I wrote back. Ray likes quiet places, and Denise needs easy parking. "That's all you need," Mom replied almost immediately. Which place should I call? I stared at the screen. This was the part I had never noticed before. Even when I declined the task, everyone expected me to remain the operating system behind it. "Pick whichever works for you," I wrote. There was no answer for nearly an hour. Then she sent me a thumbs up. The dinner happened. Nobody starved. Nobody was stranded in a parking garage. Uncle Ray apparently complained about the salmon, but he complained about salmon everywhere, so I did not count that as a failure of family organization. A few days later, Dad forwarded the insurance email. The subject line said renewal notice. The body said his commercial policy needed updated vehicle information before the end of the month. I read enough to know it was not complicated. I called him. "Hey," he said. "You saw it?" "Yes." "Can you tell me what they need?" "The email tells you." I read it. "Then you know." He gave a short laugh. "Apparently I don't, or I wouldn't be calling you. Normally I would have opened the attachment, made a list, maybe called the agent if Dad had questions. Instead, I said, they need the current vehicle list and the mileage estimates. Call the number at the bottom if anything has changed." "You sure that's all?" "That's what the email says." "You don't mind double-checking?" "I already did." "So it's fine?" "You still need to send them the information." There was a pause. "Can you just handle it?" There was no anger in his voice. No manipulation I could point to. Dad sounded exactly the way he always sounded when he believed I could finish a task faster than he could. "No." Another pause. Okay. He did not argue, which somehow made the guilt worse. I knew Dad worked long hours. I knew he hated paperwork. I knew insurance language annoyed him. I also knew I could probably take care of the entire thing during one lunch break. That old calculation had justified half the favors I did for my family. It would take me 10 minutes. It would save him an hour. Why make a point out of it? I had spent years thinking every boundary had to be justified against efficiency. If I could do something faster, why shouldn't I? If I understood it better, why let someone else struggle? What I had never asked was why another adult's inconvenience automatically became my responsibility, simply because I was better at avoiding it. At work, I did not behave that way. That realization came during a Tuesday project meeting. I managed commercial construction projects, which meant my days were full of things that could go wrong if someone missed one small detail. Permits, delivery windows, subcontractors, client changes, safety inspections, budgets, revised drawings. There was always a problem available if I wanted one. That morning, one of our site coordinators, Evan, told me a supplier had delivered the wrong door hardware to a project downtown. He started explaining the options, clearly expecting me to decide. "Which one do you recommend?" I asked. He looked surprised. "Probably replacement. We can get the right set Thursday." "Then do that. The client might complain about the delay. Tell them why." "You don't want me to copy you before I send it?" "Copy me. You don't need me to write it." He nodded, made a note, and moved on. 10 minutes later, I assigned another issue to our estimator, asked a superintendent to resolve a scheduling conflict, and told our administrative assistant to handle a vendor update without asking me to approve every sentence. Nobody accused me of abandoning them. Nobody told me I was making a point. Nobody said, "But you're better at this." They simply did their jobs. After the meeting, my colleague Marissa stayed behind. She had worked with me long enough to notice when I was more distracted than I thought I was. "You okay?" she asked. "Family stuff. Wedding family stuff?" I had told her a simplified version because I needed someone outside the situation to confirm I was not losing my mind. She knew Olivia had locked me in the venue supply room and that the processional had been delayed. She did not know every argument that followed. "Related," I said. She leaned against the conference table. "Still trying to fix everybody?" "I'm actually trying not to. That seems harder for you." I laughed. Apparently, Marissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know you don't have to own every problem just because you can solve it." The sentence stayed with me, not because it was profound, because at work it was obvious. If I personally solved every problem on a construction project, I would be terrible at my job. My value came from knowing which problems belonged to me and which needed to stay with the person responsible for them. With my family, I had spent years treating delegation like selfishness. Once I saw that difference, I started noticing how often my reflex activated. Mom would mention that the restaurant needed new patio heaters, and my brain would immediately compare prices. Dad would complain that his phone calendar was not syncing properly, and I would reach for it before he asked. A cousin would say nobody knew who was hosting Christmas, and I would mentally build a group text. I had trained myself to hear unfinished problems as invitations. The truth was not flattering enough to let me place all the blame on Mom and Dad. I complained about being the responsible one, but there were years when being needed was the only thing I knew how to be proud of. That had started long before adulthood. When I was a teenager, responsibility made me feel older. Important, Mom trusted me with things she did not trust Olivia with. Dad spoke to me like I was capable. Teachers called me mature. Relatives said I had a good head on my shoulders. When the house was chaotic and the restaurant was consuming my parents' time, being useful gave me a place in the system. Later, being useful became a habit, then an identity. By 37, I did not need anyone to tell me to fix things. Sometimes I volunteered before they asked. That did not make the arrangement fair, but it meant I had helped make it durable. A week after the insurance email, Dad called again. "I messed something up," he said. "I was at my desk after work, halfway through reheating leftovers." "What?" "The insurance renewal." I stopped. "What happened?" "I thought the mileage form was due Friday. It was due yesterday." My brain did what it always did. Open laptop. Find the email. Call the agent. Ask whether late submission was acceptable. Draft whatever Dad needed. Instead, I leaned against the kitchen counter. Have you called them? No. That's why I'm calling you. Call them. They're probably closed. It's 5 to 10. Try. He sighed. Jessica. Dad, I'm not your insurance agent. I know that. Then call the person who is. Another sigh. I'm not asking you to do everything. You called me before you called them. There was silence. That landed. Dad said, Fine. I almost stopped him. The sound of disappointment in his voice hit the exact place guilt usually entered. I could have said, Give me the number. Instead, I waited. What if there's a late fee? He asked. Then there's a late fee. You're really going to let me pay a fee when you could probably fix it? I felt irritation rise, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not letting you do anything. You missed a deadline. That's a little harsh. It's factual. I've been working 12-hour days. I know. I thought you'd understand. There was that word again. Understand. In my family, understanding usually meant transferring the consequence to the person who understood most. I do understand, I said. Call them. Dad hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in my kitchen feeling miserable. For about 5 minutes, I convinced myself I had become petty. Dad was not Olivia. He had not locked me in a room. He had apologized, imperfectly but sincerely, for the wedding. Why was I suddenly drawing a hard line over an insurance form? Then I caught what I was doing. I was treating every boundary as a verdict on the person asking. It was not. Dad did not have to be cruel for the task to still belong to him. 20 minutes later, he called back. They answered. And? They accepted it. Good. I had to pay a $75 late processing fee. I'm sorry, he grunted. The world didn't end. No. I suppose that's your point. It wasn't. That was true. I had not withheld help to teach him a lesson. I had simply stopped preventing the lesson from existing. Dad was quiet for a moment. I could have called them first. Yes, you don't have to sound so pleased. I smiled despite myself. I'm eating leftover pasta. This is not a victory lap. He laughed. It was the first normal laugh we had shared since the wedding. That mattered too. Boundaries did not have to turn every relationship into war. The stranger shift was happening between Mom and Olivia. I did not see it directly at first. I noticed through the family group chat. Mom had always sent certain questions to me privately because she knew I would answer. Suddenly, those same questions started appearing in the group. Who wants to coordinate Thanksgiving dishes? Does anyone remember what time Aunt Denise usually comes? Olivia. Can you check whether Daniel's family is coming? Can someone confirm how many chairs we'll need? I watched the messages pile up. For years, Mom would have sent one text to me. Jessica, can you sort this out? I would have done it. Instead, the questions remained visible to everyone. Olivia ignored the first two. Mom tagged her on the third. Olivia finally replied, Why are you asking me all this? Mom wrote back, Because Jessica isn't organizing it this year. I stared at the screen. The implication was so casual that it almost made me laugh. There had never been a family vote appointing me Thanksgiving coordinator. No one had ever formally asked whether I wanted that job. Apparently, I had held it long enough that my absence created a vacancy. Olivia responded, Then handle it yourselves. Mom, I'm trying. Olivia, I just got married. I have enough going on. Hannah added a neutral message offering to bring dessert, clearly trying to redirect the chat before it turned into another argument. I did not respond. 10 minutes later, Mom texted me privately. You see what I'm dealing with? I put my phone down, then picked it up again. I typed, Yes. Mom replied. And? I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to say Olivia was difficult. She wanted me to notice the contrast. She wanted me to step back into my old position, because now I had proof that I was easier. Instead, I wrote, You asked her to help. She said no. That was enough to irritate Mom. You never used to say no to everything. I read the sentence several times. I had not realized until then that my willingness had become part of my character description. Jessica doesn't say no. Not often. Not when family needs her. Olivia can be emotional. Jessica will handle it. Mom can be overwhelmed. Jessica will handle it. Dad can hate paperwork. Jessica will handle it. The more reliable I became, the less visible the reliability was. I wrote, I'm not saying no to everything. I'm saying no to things that aren't automatically mine. Mom did not answer. The next Sunday, I went to my parents' house for lunch because I did not want boundaries to become an excuse for disappearing. That mattered to me. I was not trying to punish everyone by withdrawing affection until they behaved correctly. I wanted to know whether we could have a relationship that did not depend on my usefulness. Dad grilled burgers despite the cooler October weather. Mom made potato salad. Olivia did not come. She said she and her husband already had plans. For most of lunch, things were almost normal. Dad complained about the Bengals. Mom talked about a supplier who had raised prices at the restaurant. I told them about a project at work. Nobody asked me to solve anything. Then Mom mentioned Thanksgiving. I still don't know who's bringing what. Dad looked at her. Make a list. I have a list. Nobody answers. Then call them. Mom looked at me. I kept eating. She sighed. Your cousin Hannah offered dessert. That sounds good. Aunt Denise said she might bring stuffing, but she always says that and then brings salad. I remember. Mom waited. I took another bite. Finally she said, You're enjoying this. I looked up. Enjoying what? Watching me struggle. No. It feels like you are. Because I'm not fixing it? Dad put down his fork. Marilyn. No. I'm serious. She knows exactly how to organize this. So do you, I said. I have the restaurant, your father, the house. And I have a full-time job. I'm not saying you don't. You're listing reasons your time matters more. That is not what I said. It's what the argument requires. Mom leaned back, angry now. You have become very technical about everything. I almost smiled because that sounded exactly like something Olivia had said. It helps when people are vague. Dad cleared his throat. Maybe we skip hosting Thanksgiving this year. Mom stared at him. You want to cancel Thanksgiving because Jessica won't send a group message? I said maybe we don't host. That's ridiculous. He shrugged. Then host it. Mom looked betrayed. I could see the old pattern trying to form. Dad avoided. Mom overwhelmed. Jessica stepped in. I did not. The silence held for several seconds. Then Mom stood, walked to the counter, grabbed a notepad, and began writing. What are you doing? Dad asked. Making a list. He looked at me. I looked back. Nobody died. After lunch, I helped clear the table because I had eaten there. And helping with dishes was ordinary courtesy, not a contract for family management. That distinction was becoming important to me. Boundaries did not mean refusing every helpful act until I had proved independence. I could carry plates because I wanted to carry plates. I could not be drafted into organizing a holiday because everyone knew I would do it well. As Mom wrapped leftovers, Aunt Denise stopped by to return a serving dish from a family gathering. She stayed for coffee. We were talking about completely unrelated things when she asked me whether work was still busy downtown. Always. You were always running somewhere, she said. Even when you were a teenager. Mom stiffened slightly. I noticed. Denise did not. She laughed. I used to see you in that pickup line at Olivia's school all the time. You'd be sitting there with those giant textbooks in the passenger seat. I looked at her. I forgot about those. You'd be studying in the car. Mom turned toward the sink. Denise smiled. And then you'd haul Olivia off to dance. I remember thinking I would have lost my mind at your age. There was nothing accusatory in her voice. She was not defending me. She did not even know she had stepped into a disputed part of our family history. That was why it mattered. I glanced at Mom, but I did not use the moment. I did not say, see? I did not ask Denise to repeat it. I did not tell her what Olivia had been saying. I simply said, the pickup line was terrible. Denise laughed. Still is. The conversation moved on. Later, driving home, I thought about how strange it felt to hear someone else remember those years without having to force the memory into an argument. That was the problem with Olivia's story. It only worked in rooms where nobody compared notes. I was beginning to understand that I did not need to campaign against it. I did not need to recruit witnesses or convince relatives that I had been some heroic teenage caretaker. I had not been. I had been a girl with textbooks in the passenger seat, waiting in a pickup line because that was what needed to happen that afternoon. Some days I resented it. Some days I liked being needed. Most days I probably did not think about it at all. That was exactly why erasing it bothered me. Reality did not have to be dramatic to deserve to remain real. By early November, Thanksgiving still had no final plan. Mom had created a spreadsheet, which I learned about because she accidentally sent me the wrong attachment in a message about something else. I almost laughed when I opened it. Guest names, arrival times, food assignments, dietary restrictions. It was perfectly competent. I called her. "You made a spreadsheet." That sounded judgmental. It was admiration. "I hate spreadsheets." Apparently not enough. She made a noise that was half laugh, half annoyance. For a moment we sounded like ourselves again. Then she said, "It would still be easier if you took a look at it." I smiled. "No, you didn't even see the final version. I'm sure it's beautiful. You're impossible. You'll survive." She laughed, despite herself. That interaction gave me hope. Maybe this was what changing a family system looked like in real life. Not one giant confrontation. Not everyone suddenly understanding. Just repeated moments where the old pattern arrived and somebody chose something slightly different. Then the Thanksgiving group chat exploded 3 days later. Olivia had apparently told Mom she and her husband would come, but were not bringing food because they had too much going on. Mom responded that everyone was bringing something. Olivia said Mom was treating her like free labor. Mom said she was asking for one side dish. Then, without warning, Olivia wrote, "Maybe ask Jessica. She loves being needed." I stared at the message. Mom did not respond. Dad did not respond. Hannah sent nothing. Nobody moved to defend me. The old version of me would have typed a paragraph. I deleted 3 different replies before sending one sentence. "I'll bring rolls." That was all. Olivia reacted with a laughing emoji. I put the phone down. Later that evening, Mom called. Ignore her. I was planning to. She's under a lot of stress. I know. Madison still isn't really speaking to her. That's not my problem. Mom sighed. Everything is so tense now. It was tense before. I was just doing more work around it. That's not fair. Maybe. She was quiet. Then she said, "Thanksgiving is going to be a disaster if you keep doing this." I knew what she meant. If I kept refusing to mediate, if I kept refusing to organize, if I kept letting Olivia's words sit there without smoothing them over, if I kept making Mom ask people directly, instead of using me as the person who already knew how to get everyone moving. For a moment, I considered not going. It would have been easy. I could tell them I had plans. I could avoid Olivia. I could avoid the group chat, the questions, Mom's frustration, Dad's discomfort, all of it. But that would have given the entire situation a shape I did not want. Jessica withdrew. Jessica stopped showing up. Jessica needed everyone to prove they needed her. I was not going to live my life according to Olivia's accusations, but I was also not going to help make them convenient. "I'm coming to Thanksgiving," I said. Mom sounded surprised. "You are?" "Yes." "Then can we please try to have one normal day?" "I can." She hesitated. "What does that mean?" "It means I'll come. I'll bring rolls. I'll eat dinner. I'll talk to people. I'm not organizing it. I'm not managing Olivia. And I'm not stepping in every time somebody gets uncomfortable." That sounds like a warning. It's confirmation. Mom exhaled slowly. "Fine." After we hung up, I stood by the window and looked down at the lights along my street. I was not going to Thanksgiving to prove I was the good daughter. I was not going to confront Olivia. I was not going to collect memories from relatives or force Mom to admit anything. I wanted to answer one question for myself. Could I sit inside my own family without becoming the person responsible for holding everyone else in place? Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. For the first time, I was going to find out. The first time I remembered the rest of what Olivia had said when I left home, I was not trying to remember it. I was standing in line at a diner 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, waiting for a takeout order after a long day at work. Someone had fed quarters into the old jukebox near the back, and a song came on that I had not heard in years. It was the kind of song that had played constantly the summer I packed my first apartment, when everything I owned still fit into a few boxes and a borrowed car. I stood there holding my receipt, and suddenly I could see Olivia in the doorway of my old bedroom again. I had already remembered that image once after the wedding. Olivia at 16, arms folded, watching me put books into a cardboard box. I remembered her face more clearly than the conversation. I remembered saying something about the job. I remembered her voice, flat and angry, saying, "Just go." For years I had stored those 2 words as evidence against myself. My little sister did not want me to leave, and I left anyway. I had never thought about whether that interpretation made sense. Guilt rarely asks for cross-examination. The song kept playing while I waited for my order, and this time the scene did not stop at those 2 words. I remembered sitting on the edge of my bed before she said them. I remembered telling Olivia that the company had given me until Monday to decide. I remembered saying I could turn the job down and find something closer to home. I remembered Olivia looking at me like I had insulted her. The memory came back in pieces, but the pieces fit. "What are you talking about?" she had asked. "The job. I know what job. I can stay here." She had stared at me. "Why?" I remembered laughing because I thought she was being deliberately difficult. "Because Mom and Dad are still working crazy hours and you have school and dance and what? And somebody has to be around." Olivia had gone quiet. I had mistaken that silence for relief. "I can find something here," I had told her. "It's not the end of the world." That was when she said it. "Just go." I had stared at her. "What?" "Take the job." "You're mad." "I'm not mad." "You look mad." "I look mad because you're acting like I'm 5. I remembered that clearly now. I remembered the exact irritation in her voice, the way only a 16-year-old could be offended by the suggestion that she needed anyone. "I didn't say you were 5. You're talking like you have to stay because of me. I'm talking like Mom and Dad are barely home before 9. So? So somebody has to make sure you eat something besides cereal." She rolled her eyes. "I can make food. You microwaved a fork last month. That happened once." I had laughed. She had not. Then she had looked at the half-packed boxes around my room and said, "If you stay because of me, I'll hate you." That was the part I had forgotten. Or maybe not forgotten exactly. Buried was a better word. I had carried the emotional conclusion of that day long after the details blurred. Olivia was hurt. I left. Therefore, I had done something to her. The older I got, the simpler the guilt became. Standing in that diner, I remembered how complicated the actual moment had been. I had asked her, "Are you sure?" She had crossed her arms tighter. "I'm 16, Jessica. I know how old you are. Then stop acting like you have to raise me." Those words landed differently now than they had then. At 22, I heard them as teenage pride. At 37, after a wedding where Olivia had locked me in a storage room because she hated people talking about the things I had done for her, I heard something else underneath them. She had already been fighting that story before either of us had language for it. My name was called from the counter, pulling me out of the memory. I took the bag, drove home, and sat in my car for several minutes after I parked because woman satire, woman self to decide what the memory meant while I was still emotional. That mattered to me. I did not want to become the mirror image of Olivia, rearranging the past until it served whatever I needed today. So I wrote down what I remembered, not the interpretation. The sequence, the job offer, my offer to stay. Her anger. "Just go. Take the job. If you stay because of me, I'll hate you. I'm 16. Stop acting like you have to raise me." Seeing the conversation on paper unsettled me. It did not prove Olivia had never been hurt after I left. It did not prove I had called enough, visited enough, or understood what my absence would feel like to her. It only proved one thing I had spent years denying myself. I had not walked away from a helpless child begging me to stay. Olivia had wanted me to go. At least that day she had. I waited until the next evening before I called Dad. He answered from the restaurant. I could hear dishes and voices behind him. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes. I need to ask you something about when I moved for my first job." He went quiet for a second. "That's random. I know. What about it? Do you remember whether I almost turned it down?" Dad laughed softly. "Of course I remember." I sat straighter. "You do? Your mother was furious with you." That surprised me enough that I almost interrupted. "Why?" "Because you were talking about staying home for no good reason." I stared at the wall. "I thought you needed me. We needed help." "That sounds like the same thing." "No." Dad's voice changed. Less defensive than usual. More thoughtful. "It didn't feel like the same thing then." "What did it feel like?" "You'd already been helping for years." "Too much, probably." I did not say anything. Dad continued before I could. "I'm not trying to rewrite anything now. We were grateful. But when you got that job, your mother and I both thought you needed to take it." "You told me that?" "Yes." "I don't remember." "You remember what you were like at 22? Half the time you heard what you wanted to argue with." I smiled despite myself. "That sounds possible. You kept saying Olivia still needed rides, and we were busy at the restaurant." "And what did you say?" "I told you we would figure it out." The phrase sat heavily between us. "Did you?" "Eventually." "What does eventually mean?" Dad sighed. "We changed schedules. Your mother handled more pickups. Olivia rode with another girl from dance sometimes. We paid one of the college kids at the restaurant to cover afternoons so one of us could leave earlier." I closed my eyes. Those were solutions. Normal adulte solution. Solutions my parents had been capable of finding once I was no longer available. Dad added, "You were convinced everything would collapse if you left." That sounds familiar. It didn't. No. There was a brief silence. Then I asked, "Do you remember Olivia telling me to go?" Dad hesitated. "Not the conversation. That's fine. I remember she was angry for a while." "Before or after?" "Both, probably." I laughed once. "That also sounds like her." Dad did not laugh back. "She missed you." "I know." She didn't know how to say that. "I know that too." I waited for the usual sentence. "We did the best we could." It never came. Instead, Dad said, "Your mother and I told you that you'd done enough." My hand tightened around the phone. "What?" "When you were talking about staying, I remember saying it. You'd done enough. Take the job." I looked down at the note I had written after the diner. "You've done enough." I did not remember Dad saying those exact words. But I remembered the feeling around them now. My parents pushing me toward the job. Olivia angry that I was treating her like a reason to stay. Me packing anyway. The guilt I had carried for 15 years had been built around a true fact and a false conclusion. I left. True. I abandoned Olivia. Not that simple. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Why did nobody ever talk about this later?" "What do you mean?" "Olivia tells people I left as soon as I could. Like I was trying to get away from her." Dad took a long breath. "I don't know. You were there." "Yes." "You knew I almost stayed." "Yes." "You knew she was 16. "Yes." "So why didn't you ever correct it?" The restaurant noise behind him suddenly felt louder. I didn't realize I needed to. That answer irritated me, but it also sounded honest. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe. We did not solve anything on that call. Dad did not apologize for 15 years of family storytelling. I did not demand he choose my version over Olivia's. What he gave me was smaller and more useful. Corroboration, not proof that my memory was perfect. Proof that the broad shape of it was real. I had almost stayed. My parents had encouraged me to go. Olivia had been 16. The family had adapted after I left. That night, I allowed myself to ask a question I had avoided since the wedding. What if both of us were telling the truth about how that year felt? I had felt trapped by responsibility and guilty for wanting a life beyond it. Olivia had felt safe because I was there, then destabilized because I was gone. She could have genuinely told me to leave. She could have genuinely resented me afterward. At 16, she did not have to understand that those emotions contradicted each other. The problem was not that she had felt abandoned. The problem was what she did with that feeling later. She turned it into a debt. Every year I lived my own life became evidence that I had chosen myself over her. Every memory of me helping before that became dangerous because it proved I had once mattered. The cleaner story was that I had never really been there. That way, she did not have to admit she had loved me enough for my leaving to hurt. Understanding that made me sad. It did not make me responsible for fixing it. That distinction was still new enough that I had to repeat it to myself. A few days later, Dad tested it without meaning to. He called around 9 in the morning while I was reviewing a project schedule. "Are you at home today?" "I am. Any chance you could run over to the house around 11? I leaned back in my chair. "For what?" "The contractor is coming back to look at the porch. I've got a supplier meeting I can't move." Mom was at the restaurant too. I looked toward the bowl near my front door where my keys were sitting. My parents' spare key was still on the ring. For half a second, my body was already ahead of me. Laptop in the car. Drive 40 minutes. Work from their kitchen. Let contractor in. Drive back. I had done some version of it dozens of times. "How long will he be there?" I asked. "Probably 20 minutes. I almost said, "I've got it." The words were so familiar I could feel them forming. Then I looked at my calendar. "I can't." Dad paused. "You said you're home." "I'm working." "I know. I just thought maybe you could work from here for an hour. I have a client call at 11:30. You'd be back." "Maybe." Another pause. "All right." I waited for guilt. Dad surprised me. "I'll move the supplier meeting." "You don't have to do that if there's another option." "There probably is. I'll figure it out." That was it. No lecture. No accusation. He solved the problem. After we hung up, I went to the kitchen for coffee and caught sight of the keys again. I picked them up. The little brass spare key looked absurdly ordinary for something that had begun to feel symbolic. I did not take it off the ring. Not yet. Returning it would have felt like a declaration, and I was not ready to turn every boundary into a ceremony. I simply put the keys back down. Around lunch, Olivia called. Not texted. Called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi. So you're talking to Dad about me now?" I closed my laptop. I asked him about the year I moved. "Why?" "Because I wanted to know what he remembered." "What exactly are you trying to prove?" "Nothing." She laughed without humor. "You're calling relatives, digging through old stories, asking Dad for evidence. That sounds like proving something." "I haven't called relatives." "You know what I mean." "No. I don't." "You're digging up the past." I felt tired rather than angry. "I'm not digging it up." "What do you call this?" "You brought it to the wedding and locked me inside it." Silence. I continued before she could change the subject. "You told Madison I was never really there. You told her I left as soon as I could. You told me at the wedding that you needed people who actually showed up for you. That's not me digging up the past, Olivia. That's you using it to explain what you did in the present. I never said you were never there. You made sure she believed it. You're taking everything literally. Funny, I'm discovering I like literal things." She exhaled sharply. "What did Dad tell you?" "That I almost turned the job down." No answer. "He said Mom and Dad told me to take it." Still nothing. "He said they changed schedules after I left. They figured it out." Olivia finally said, "Good for them. Do you remember telling me to go?" Her silence changed. That was answer enough to tell me the memory was not entirely mine. "Do you?" I asked. I was 16. Yes. I was angry. Yes. I didn't know what I was saying. "That's possible. You're acting like that one conversation means I wasn't hurt." "I'm not. You left anyway." There it was. The sentence that had controlled so much of our relationship because I had always answered it the same way. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't have a choice. I had to take the job. I called. I came home. I didn't mean to hurt you." Every response was a defense, which allowed Olivia to remain the prosecutor. This time I did not defend anything. "Yes," I said. "I did." She seemed confused by the absence of an argument. That's all you have to say? What else do you want? You make it sound like it doesn't matter. It mattered. It changed both of us. Then why are you acting like I have no right to be angry? You have every right to be angry that I left. That quieted her. You have every right to say it hurt, I continued. You have every right to wish I had handled things differently afterward. What you don't have is the right to turn me leaving at 22 into proof that I was never there before. She said nothing. I could hear faint traffic through her phone. I didn't ask you to raise me, she said finally. I know. You keep acting like I owe you for things I never asked you to do. I don't think you owe me. That's easy for you to say now. No, it's easy for me to say because it's true. You don't get it. Then explain it without changing what happened. That stopped her. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Olivia said, You always have to win. I almost reacted. Almost told her this was not about winning. Almost started another 20-minute explanation. Instead, I said, I'm not trying to win. Could have fooled me. I'm trying to stop paying for the same decision forever. She went quiet. That was the first sentence I said that seemed to reach her. Her voice softened when she answered. You still left. I looked out my window at the late November sky, gray and flat over the neighboring buildings. Yes, I said. I did. Then I waited. I did not add that I was sorry. I did not explain the job. I did not list the weekends I came home or the phone calls I made. I did not remind her she had told me to go. I simply let the truth stand without turning it into a confession. For the first time in 15 years, leaving home at 22 felt like something I had done, not something I still owed for. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, I had spent enough weeks practicing boundaries that I almost believed I knew how the day would feel. I was wrong. Saying no to a contractor appointment or an insurance form was one thing. Sitting at the same table with the people who had built the old version of our family around me was something else entirely. I drove to my parents' house late enough that nobody could reasonably hand me a list of errands, but early enough that Mom could not accuse me of making an entrance. I brought the rolls I had promised, a bottle of wine, and nothing else. Mom opened the door before I knocked twice. The house smelled like turkey, onions, butter, and the cinnamon candles she only used during the holidays. She looked relieved to see me, then immediately glanced at the bag in my hand. You brought the rolls. I said I would. I know, I just wasn't sure. That irritated me more than it should have. Why? She gave me a look that said she did not want to start before I had taken off my coat. Come inside. The kitchen looked as though Mom had been fighting it since dawn. Every surface held something. Dad stood near the sink, carving a turkey with the concentration of a surgeon. Aunt Denise was transferring green beans into a serving dish. Hannah was arranging desserts on the counter. Nobody asked me to take over, which I appreciated until Mom said, Can you check whether the mashed potatoes need more salt? I looked at her. She caught herself. Never mind, I'll do it. That small correction mattered. I smiled faintly. They look good. Mom tasted them herself. Olivia arrived 20 minutes later with her husband and no food. I noticed because Mom noticed. She looked at Olivia's empty hands and then at the clock. I thought you were bringing sweet potatoes. Olivia kissed Mom's cheek. I told you I wasn't bringing anything. You told me you were busy. I didn't think that meant literally nothing. It means literally nothing. Her husband gave an apologetic little shrug and lifted the bottle of bourbon he was carrying. We brought this. Dad laughed from the kitchen. That counts. Mom did not think it counted, but she let it go. Olivia looked at me. I looked back. Happy Thanksgiving, I said. You too. That was all. For the first hour, we behaved like people who understood that extended family was present and no one wanted to become the story told next Thanksgiving. We talked about work, football, the restaurant, someone's new roof, someone else's college application. Hannah asked me about a project downtown. Dad complained that one of his suppliers had raised prices again. Olivia stayed mostly beside her husband and Madison, who had come because she had been invited weeks before the wedding and had not yet fully ended the friendship. Madison was polite to Olivia. She was not warm. The difference was subtle enough that most people probably missed it. I did not. Neither did Olivia. Every time Madison laughed at something Hannah said, Olivia glanced over. Every time Madison moved to another part of the room, Olivia seemed to register the distance. It would have been easy to feel satisfied watching that. I did not. The truth was sadder. Whatever Olivia had done to me, I knew what it meant to lose the version of a relationship you thought was safe. When we finally sat down, Dad said grace. Mom had arranged the table so carefully that it would have looked effortless to anyone who had not watched her spend 3 weeks asking people what they were bringing. The turkey was good. The stuffing was Aunt Denise's, not salad. Hannah's pie had survived the drive. For a while, Thanksgiving actually felt normal. Then Mom ruined it by trying to compliment herself. I think this turned out pretty well considering all the changes this year. Dad looked at her. I kept eating. Aunt Denise said, "What changes?" Mom should have said nothing. Instead, she smiled, with the brittle satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for an opening. Well, we've all had to adjust, since Jessica decided she needs boundaries. The table changed. Not dramatically. Nobody dropped a fork. But conversation stopped in the way family conversation stops when everyone recognizes a sentence was aimed at one person. I put down my glass. Mom. What? I'm not criticizing. Olivia gave a small laugh. That sound made me look at her. She said, "No, she likes this." I waited. Olivia leaned back in her chair. "She likes making people prove they need her." Her husband murmured, "Liv." "No, seriously. We're all supposed to suddenly notice how much Jessica does because she stopped doing it." I felt heat rise into my face, but I did not answer immediately. I had promised myself I would not fight every sentence Olivia threw at me. Mom jumped in first. "Olivia, that isn't helping." "Why? Because I'm saying what everyone's thinking?" Aunt Denise frowned. "I'm not thinking that." Olivia ignored her. "You spent years being the one everyone called," she said to me. "Now you act offended that people call." "I'm not offended that people call. You just don't answer." "I answer. I don't automatically take over. That's the same thing with better wording." I looked at her. "No, it isn't." Her husband shifted in his chair again, clearly wishing the conversation would die. Dad said, "Let's change the subject." Olivia laughed. "Of course." Dad frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means nobody wants to say Jessica likes being the martyr." That did it. Not because the accusation was the worst thing she had said, because I had spent months examining the part of it that might be true. I knew I liked being competent. I knew I had reinforced my own role by stepping in too fast. I had admitted that to myself before Olivia ever used it against me. That meant I did not have to be afraid of the accusation anymore. "I did like being needed," I said. The table went quiet again. Olivia looked surprised. I continued. "For a long time, yes. Being the one who could fix things made me feel important. Sometimes I stepped in because it was easier than letting someone else struggle." Mom looked at me carefully. Olivia opened her mouth. I raised one hand slightly. "That doesn't mean every responsibility belonged to me." Her expression hardened. "That's convenient." "No, it's complicated. You always make yourself sound so reasonable." "I'm trying to be. You want everyone to admire how self-aware you are now?" I nearly laughed. Instead, I pushed my chair back slightly. "Olivia, I came here to eat Thanksgiving dinner. I'm not doing this with you." "There. That." "What?" "You leave when you don't like what people say." The sentence hit the exact place she intended. For 1 second, I was 22 again. Boxes on my bedroom floor. "Just go." You still left. I stood halfway from my chair. Then Aunt Denise spoke. "Need her?" Everyone looked at her. She had been quiet through most of the argument, cutting turkey into smaller pieces, as if she were deciding whether the conversation deserved her attention. Now she looked at Olivia. "Honey, we all needed Jessica." Mom's face changed. Olivia frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Back then." Denise gestured vaguely between us. "Your parents were at that restaurant 6 days a week. Jessica was always running around after somebody." Mom stiffened. "Denise." "What?" "I'm not criticizing you." That phrase sounded familiar. Denise continued, apparently unaware that she had stepped into the center of something. "I used to see Jessica in that school pickup line with textbooks all over the front seat. Half the time she'd leave there and take Olivia straight to dance." Hannah nodded slowly. I remember that. Olivia looked at her. Hannah seemed surprised by her own memory. You used to complain Jessica made you eat in the car because you were always late. I was a teenager, Olivia said. Exactly, Hannah replied. That's why I remember. We all complained about whoever drove us anywhere. Aunt Denise smiled. Jessica was like a taxi with homework. A few people laughed softly. Olivia did not. Mom put down her fork. Can we not make this into some story about Jessica raising Olivia? Because that is not what happened. I turned to her. I didn't say it was. Denise shook her head. Nobody said that. Another relative, Uncle Ray, cleared his throat. Marilyn's right about one thing. Your parents were working themselves to death back then. I looked at him. He continued. That restaurant nearly went under more than once. I remember Charles borrowing against equipment to make payroll. It wasn't like they were sitting at a country club while Jessica did everything. Dad's shoulders tightened. Mom looked almost grateful. Olivia looked vindicated. There it was. The moment when I could have turned the table into a trial. I could have argued that hardship did not justify burdening me. I could have listed everything I had done. I could have made my parents defend themselves. Instead, I said, I know. Uncle Ray blinked. I know they were working themselves to death, I continued. I know they had good reasons. I'm not trying to make them monsters. Mom looked at me. I kept my voice calm. I'm asking everyone to stop pretending the cost disappeared because they had good reasons. Nobody spoke. Dad looked down at his plate. Mom's face had gone very still. Uncle Ray nodded once. That's fair. Olivia pushed back from the table. No, it isn't. I looked at her. She was angry now in a way I had not seen since the wedding. Not defensive. Exposed. You all talk like I'm who I am because Jessica drove me places. No one said that. You say it every time you tell one of these stories. Denise frowned. Sweetheart, nobody's taking anything away from you. That's exactly what you're doing. How? You make it sound like I couldn't function without her. I understood then that Olivia had heard every memory as an accusation long before the wedding. Jessica drove you. Jessica helped you. Jessica was there. To me, those were facts. To Olivia, they were claims of ownership. She looked at me. Say it. Say what? That you don't think you made me who I am. I don't. She laughed sharply. That was quick. Because it's true. You're lying. No. I leaned forward. You don't owe me your life because I drove you to dance class. The words came out more gently than I expected. Olivia blinked. You don't owe me your career, your marriage, your independence, your personality, none of it. Then stop acting like I owe you anything. I'm not asking you to owe me. Yes, you are. What do you think I want? Credit. No. You want everyone to remember what you did. Yes. She stared at me. I did not take it back. I want people to remember what happened. That is not the same thing as wanting credit for who you became. She shook her head. You don't hear yourself. I do. No, you want your version to be the official version. I want you to stop erasing me. That was the sentence that broke something in the room. Mom said my name. Jessica. I looked at her. She gave me the same expression she had worn in the hallway at the wedding. Enough. Stop. Be the one who can handle it. Olivia saw it too. She folded her arms. See? Even Mom knows. I turned back to her. No, Mom knows I'm usually easier to silence. Mom's face went pale. That is not fair. I stood. I'm not doing this here. Olivia laughed. Of course you're leaving. I looked down at her. This time, the accusation did not land the way she wanted. I came to dinner. So? I brought what I said I'd bring. I sat here. I listened. I answered you. I'm leaving because this conversation is done. You always decide when things are done. No, I decide when I'm done participating. Mom stood too. Jessica, please sit down. I looked at her. I came to Thanksgiving. I didn't come to take my old job back. What old job? The one where I keep everyone calm enough that nobody has to deal with what they said. Mom stared at me. Dad finally spoke. Let her go. Mom turned toward him. Charles, she said she's done. The words were simple. They helped. I picked up my coat from the chair near the hallway. Hannah followed me as far as the front door. I'm sorry, she said. You didn't do anything. I should have shut Olivia down earlier. No. She frowned. I mean it. You don't have to manage her for me. Hannah gave a tired smile. I guess that runs in the family. Apparently. She hugged me. I hugged her back. Outside, the cold air felt good after the heat of the house. I sat in my car for a minute before starting it. My hands were shaking, which annoyed me. I had not shouted. Nobody had threatened me. Nothing catastrophic had happened. Still, the dinner felt like a line. Not because everyone suddenly understood me. They did not. Uncle Ray still believed my parents' circumstances mattered. He was right. Mom still thought I was dragging old pain into the present. She was partly right about that, too. Olivia still believed remembering my role diminished hers. That was where we could not meet. I drove home without crying. That surprised me. For years, leaving a family gathering angry would have filled me with enough guilt to turn the car around before I reached the highway. This time I kept driving. When I got home, I changed into sweatpants, heated leftovers I had packed before the argument started, and sat on my couch with a glass of water. My phone remained face down for almost an hour. When I finally checked it, I had 3 messages. One from Dad. Home safe? I replied yes. One from Mom. I wish you hadn't left like that. I did not answer. The third was from Madison. I stared at her name. We had spoken only a few times since the wedding, always because something Olivia had told her no longer matched something she had learned. The message read, I need to ask you something. Did Olivia ever tell you what she told me about why you left? I sat up. I typed back, what did she tell you? The typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then Madison sent, not tonight. I don't want to do this over text. Can we talk tomorrow? I read the message twice. Something in the wording bothered me. Not because I thought Madison had uncovered a dramatic secret. Because by then I had learned that Olivia's most effective distortions were never dramatic. They were small enough to sound like memory. Small enough to become someone else's assumption. Small enough to survive for years without anyone asking whether the pieces fit. I answered, yes, call me tomorrow. Then I put the phone down. Thanksgiving had answered the question I went there to ask. I could sit inside my family without holding everyone in place. The family could survive my refusal to fix the room. What I did not know yet was that Madison was about to show me how long Olivia had been rearranging the furniture. Madison called me the next morning a little after 10. I had already been awake for hours, partly because Thanksgiving had left too much noise in my head, and partly because I knew her message was not going to lead anywhere comfortable. I took the call at my kitchen table with coffee in front of me and a notebook closed beside it. I did not open the notebook. I did not want every conversation with Olivia's friends to start feeling like testimony. Madison did not waste time. I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand I'm not saying Olivia gave me one exact fake story. That's not what happened. I know. She told me pieces over years. I filled in some of the rest. That's what you said before. Right. But after yesterday, I went back through old messages. I sat a little straighter. Why? Because I wanted to know whether I was imagining the way she framed things. And I wasn't. Madison paused, and when she continued, her voice had the careful quality of someone trying not to turn interpretation into fact. She told me Olivia had repeatedly described my leaving as the moment she learned family was unreliable. She used phrases like, I got out as soon as I could, I had my own life and never looked back, and by high school I knew I was basically on my own. Olivia had never written, Jessica abandoned me at 13. Madison had simply absorbed the emotional picture and placed Olivia younger in it. I really thought she was around 13, Madison said. Maybe 12 or 13. I pictured you leaving when she was still a kid. She was 16. I know that now. She was still a kid in some ways. I know, but 16 is not 12 and you didn't disappear. No. Madison exhaled. She made the timeline feel different without technically giving me the wrong year. That sentence was uncomfortable because it captured Olivia's talent perfectly. She rarely needed one large lie when enough small framing could create the same result. What happened when you asked her about it? I said. Madison was quiet for a moment. I confronted her Saturday night. I did not interrupt. What followed was not a scene I had witnessed. and I was careful even in my own mind to keep it that way. I only knew what Madison chose to tell me afterward. I asked why she let me think you left her when she was much younger, Madison said. She told me age didn't change how it felt. I said that wasn't the point. Then I asked why she told me you two were never close, if you had basically been helping her for years before you left. What did she say? She said you're making everybody exaggerate what happened. I almost laughed. I'm making Aunt Denise remember a school pickup line. That's pretty much what I said. Madison told me Olivia became angry then. Not screaming, defensive. Olivia accused her of taking my side and treating the wedding like proof that every story she had ever told was false. Madison said she tried to explain that the problem was not whether Olivia had been hurt. The problem was that Olivia had used Madison's sympathy for that hurt to make me look like someone I apparently had never been. Then Madison told me the line that mattered most. I said, I was your friend. You turned me into evidence. I closed my eyes briefly. What did she say? She said I was betraying her. That sounded exactly like Olivia. Madison continued. I told her I wasn't choosing you. I was choosing not to be used against you. I let that sit. Are you still speaking? Barely. I'm sorry. Don't be. I mean it. Whatever she did with me, losing a friendship still hurts. Madison was silent long enough that I wondered whether the call had dropped. Then she said, That's the part she doesn't get about you. What? You don't seem happy about any of this. I looked down at my coffee. I'm not. I did not tell Madison that there were moments when Olivia facing consequences felt satisfying. I was not trying to turn myself into a saint. When someone lies about you and people finally notice, relief can look a lot like pleasure. But every consequence also confirmed that whatever relationship I thought we still had was getting harder to recover. Madison said she needed distance from Olivia. She did not ask what I thought she should do, and I was grateful. I did not want responsibility for ending their friendship any more than I wanted responsibility for preserving it. Before we hung up, I said, Whatever you decide, don't make it about protecting me. I won't. Good. I'm making it about whether I trust her. That was worse for Olivia than anything I could have asked Madison to do. 3 days later, Mom called. Her voice told me before her words that she was upset. Have you talked to Olivia? Not since Thanksgiving. She's not doing well. I sat down on the edge of my couch. What does that mean? Madison is barely speaking to her. She and Eric are fighting. Eric was Olivia's husband. Until that point, he had mostly stayed outside the conflict. He had been polite to me at Thanksgiving, uncomfortable when Olivia attacked me. But he had not inserted himself. What are they fighting about? Mom hesitated. Trust. That was all I needed to know. I'm not asking for details. I don't know all the details. Olivia said they're starting counseling. I was surprised but not shocked. That sounds reasonable. Reasonable? Yes. Her marriage is barely a few months old. And this is not normal. Counseling after a trust problem is more normal than pretending there isn't one. Mom made an impatient sound. Jessica, please don't turn this into another lecture. I wasn't. She is falling apart. I recognized the sentence immediately because it was the same kind of sentence that had controlled me for years. Olivia is overwhelmed. Olivia needs reassurance. Olivia is sensitive. Olivia is falling apart. The next sentence was always some version of Jessica, do something. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to talk to Madison. No, you didn't even let me finish. I know what you're going to ask. You don't. You want me to tell Madison the wedding was a misunderstanding. Mom went quiet. That was answer enough. She thinks you were locked in that room as part of some plan. I was locked in that room as part of a plan. You know what I mean. No, Mom, I really don't anymore. I want you to tell her, Olivia panicked. That's all. That would be true. Exactly. But not complete. Mom sighed. Not every conversation needs to contain every ugly detail. This one does if the missing detail is why Madison feels lied to. She's throwing away years of friendship over 10 minutes at a wedding. No. She's questioning whether Olivia used those years of friendship to build a story about me. You are making this bigger. I'm not talking to Madison. There was a long pause. Then Mom said, Be her sister. I almost answered immediately. Instead, I waited. The phrase moved through me more deeply than I expected, because there had been years when I would have done almost anything if someone framed it as being a good sister. Mom. What? I was her sister when I drove her to dance. I was her sister when I moved away. I was her sister at the wedding. I was still her sister while she locked the door. That's not fair. No, it isn't. Mom hung up angry. For the rest of the afternoon, I told myself I had made the right decision. Then, around 9 that night, I opened Madison's message thread. I wish I could say I never considered helping Olivia. I did. I typed 3 different versions. The first said Olivia had always been complicated about our childhood, and Madison should not let one terrible decision erase an entire friendship. I deleted it. The second said Olivia had panicked at the wedding, and probably did not understand how much damage the lie about the ceremony role would cause. I deleted that too. The third was shorter. I don't think Olivia meant to use you. I think she was scared. I stared at those words. Then I opened my screenshots from the wedding. Please don't make this harder. Madison is opening the doors. I need one day where things are about the people who actually showed up for me. I read it twice. Olivia had not panicked and accidentally involved Madison. She had told Madison 3 days earlier that I volunteered. She had allowed me to believe I still had the role. Then she had physically removed me when those 2 stories were about to collide. Afterward, she told relatives I decided the change was better that way. If I sent Madison a softer version now, I would be doing exactly what Mom wanted. Not restoring the truth, restoring comfort. I deleted the message. My thumb hovered over the empty text field for another few seconds. Then I closed the app. The next Saturday, I met Mom for lunch because she asked me to. I almost refused. But I wanted her to say directly what she had tried to ask over the phone. We went back to the same quiet restaurant where she had admitted knowing about the ceremony switch. She looked more tired than she had in September. Eric talked to me, she said after we ordered. About Olivia? Yes. I waited. He said he doesn't know what version of things he's getting anymore. I felt a knot form in my stomach. That's between them. I know. Then why tell me? Because this is what I meant when I said she's falling apart. I looked at Mom. Did Eric ask me to do anything? No. Did Olivia? No. Then this is you asking. Mom's expression tightened. I'm her mother, and I'm not her repair department. Jessica. I mean that literally. She made a terrible mistake. She made several. You want her punished forever? No. That's what this looks like. What punishment have I given her? Mom opened her mouth, then stopped. I continued. I haven't told Madison to leave. I haven't called Eric. I haven't called relatives. I haven't posted anything. I haven't demanded an apology in front of the family. I went to Thanksgiving, and she attacked me. She's angry. So am I. You handle anger differently. There it was again. The strong one. The capable one. The daughter whose emotions were treated as safer because she could carry them without breaking the furniture. Mom lowered her voice. Talk to Madison. Just tell her it was a misunderstanding. He sat back. You want me to lie so Olivia doesn't lose someone. I want you to help her. No. You want me to reduce what happened until Madison feels guilty for reacting to it. That is not what I'm asking. It is exactly what you're asking. She's your sister. I looked at Mom. I was. The words came out quietly. Mom's face changed. I continued before she could turn them into something I did not mean. I was her sister before the wedding. I was her sister when she told people I was never there. I was her sister when she decided Madison needed to replace me. I was her sister inside that room. Stop. No, you sound like you hate her. I don't. Then why are you doing this? I'm not doing anything to her. You're letting everything fall apart. That is not the same thing. Mom looked close to tears now, which was difficult for me because my instinct still reacted to her pain. I wanted to reach across the table. I wanted to say something that would make the problem smaller. Instead, I said the thing she least wanted to hear. I'm not creating consequences for Olivia. I'm refusing to erase them. Mom shook her head. You think that makes you innocent? I'm not trying to be innocent. What does that mean? It means I know I helped build this system too. I spent years solving things before anyone else had to. I liked being useful. I made it easy for everyone to assume I would keep doing it. Mom said nothing, but I'm allowed to stop. She looked away. Our food arrived, and for several minutes neither of us touched it. Eventually Mom said, "What happens now?" "With what?" "With Olivia." "I don't know." "You really don't?" "No." That answer seemed to scare her more than anger would have. My family was accustomed to me having plans. What happens now? Usually I knew. Fix the reservation. Call the contractor. Talk to Olivia. Calm Dad down. Explain Mom to somebody else. This time, I genuinely did not know what happened next. And I was beginning to understand that not knowing was not the same thing as failing. Before we left, Mom asked one last question. "If Olivia says something at Christmas or the next family dinner, are you going to keep correcting her?" "I haven't been correcting everything. You know what I mean." I thought about it. "No, I'm not going to chase every version." Mom looked relieved. Then I added, "But if she says again that I walked out of the wedding role or volunteered to give it up, I'm correcting it once. In front of whoever she says it to." Her relief disappeared. "Jessica, I'm telling you now so nobody gets to call it an ambush later. You have screenshots. You have that email from the venue. What are you planning to do? Present evidence at dinner?" "No." "Then what?" "Tell the truth." Mom stood and picked up her purse. "Then don't complain when this family breaks." I stayed seated for a second, looking at her. If it only stays together when I lie, it's already broken. She walked away without answering. I sat there after she left, surrounded by people eating lunch and talking about ordinary things, and realized something had shifted again. Until then, I had been defending myself from Olivia's version of the past. Now I had decided on something simpler. I would not hunt the lie. I would not expose her for sport. I would not turn every family dinner into a trial. But if Olivia chose to put the lie in front of me again, I was finally going to stop moving out of its way. Olivia's birthday dinner was in the second week of January, at my parents' restaurant. Mom invited the same cluster of relatives who usually came every year, along with a few of Olivia's friends. Hannah was there because she was family. Madison was there because, despite everything that had happened since Thanksgiving, she had not completely ended the friendship yet. From what she had told me, she had pulled back, stopped answering every call, and refused to keep discussing me with Olivia. But when Olivia invited her to the birthday dinner, Madison accepted. I suspected Olivia wanted her there, partly because an empty chair would have made too many people ask questions. I almost declined the invitation. Then I remembered what I had told Mom in December. I was not going to chase every version Olivia told. I was not going to turn family gatherings into trials. But if she put the wedding lie in front of me again, I would correct it once. That was the agreement I had made with myself. So I went. My parents had reserved the long table in the back section of the restaurant, far enough from the regular dinner crowd that we could talk without disturbing other customers. Dad moved between the table and the kitchen during the first half hour, because he never completely stopped working when he was in the building. Mom had put flowers near Olivia's place and ordered a cake from the bakery she had used since we were teenagers. Olivia arrived with Eric. They looked fine. That was my first thought, and almost immediately I hated myself for having it. Their marriage was none of my business. Mom had told me they were in counseling, and that Eric had started questioning whether Olivia's version of conflicts was always complete. I had not asked for more. When Eric hugged Mom and shook Dad's hand, he looked tired but polite. He gave me a small nod. "Hey, Jessica. Hey." Nothing more. Madison arrived 10 minutes later. Olivia stood to hug her. Madison hugged back. It was not cold enough to embarrass anyone, but it was not the embrace of two women who had spent years treating each other like chosen family either. Olivia noticed. I could tell because she became brighter afterward. Louder. More affectionate. She pulled Madison into photographs. She told stories from college. She made a point of saying, "Remember when we did this?" And, "You were the only person who knew that." I did not think she was consciously performing every second. That would have been too simple. But Olivia had always been good at turning discomfort into presentation. If something looked normal long enough, she could almost believe it was. Dinner started well. Dad made a short toast about how proud he was of Olivia. Eric added something kind about their first year together. Aunt Denise told a story about Olivia cutting her own bangs at 9 and blaming the scissors. Everyone laughed. For nearly an hour, nobody mentioned the wedding. I began to think maybe I had worried for nothing. Then Aunt Denise asked about a photograph. She had been scrolling through pictures on Olivia's phone because Olivia was showing her a new wedding album that had finally arrived. Denise stopped at one of the ceremony shots. "Oh," she said, "that reminds me. Whatever happened with the doors that day, I remember somebody saying Jessica was supposed to open them." My fork stopped halfway to my plate. The question was casual. Denise was not baiting anyone. She genuinely wanted to know. Mom saw the danger immediately. "Denise, look at the next picture. That one of Charles crying is hilarious." Dad frowned. "I wasn't crying. You absolutely were." But Olivia had already heard the question. She took her phone back and smiled. Jessica couldn't stand Madison being important that day, so she walked away from the roll. The table went still. Not completely. Someone at the far end was still talking to Eric. A server was clearing plates. The kitchen doors opened and closed. But around Olivia, the air changed. I looked at her. She looked directly at me. There was something almost defiant in her expression. Maybe she had forgotten my warning to Mom. Maybe she assumed I would not challenge her on her birthday. Maybe she had told the story enough times that it no longer felt dishonest. Whatever the reason, she had chosen it. I set down my fork. "Is that the version you want to stand by?" Mom closed her eyes. Olivia laughed softly. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means exactly what I asked. Jessica, did I walk away from the role because I couldn't stand Madison being important?" She folded her arms. "You were upset. That wasn't the question. You always do this." "Do what?" "Turn conversations into cross-examinations. I asked you whether what you just told Aunt Denise is true." Olivia looked around the table, probably expecting someone to tell me to stop. Mom started to. "Jessica, this is her birthday." "I know." Olivia leaned back. "Yes." I looked at her. "Yes, what?" "Yes, that's what happened. You didn't like that I wanted Madison involved, and you made the whole thing into a problem." I nodded once. "All right." Madison had gone completely still beside her. I turned toward her. "Madison, what were you told before the wedding?" Olivia's eyes widened. "Don't drag her into this." "I'm not dragging her anywhere. You just said the story in front of her." Madison looked at Olivia, then at me. She could have refused. I would have accepted that. Instead, she said, "You were supposed to have volunteered." Aunt Denise frowned. "Volunteered for what?" Madison kept her voice calm. "Olivia told me on Wednesday before the wedding that Jessica wanted me to open the ceremony doors instead. She said Jessica thought it would mean more because I'd been there for her." Olivia shook her head. "That's not exactly what I said." Madison stared at her. "Yes, it is. You misunderstood." "No." That single word landed harder than a paragraph would have. Olivia looked at me. "So now you've got Madison rehearsing your version?" Madison's face changed. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make this about Jessica manipulating me." "I didn't say that." "You were about to." Olivia looked away. I had no satisfaction in watching Madison defend herself. If anything, it made me angrier because Olivia was doing exactly what Madison had accused her of doing months earlier, turning her into evidence, then attacking her when the evidence stopped cooperating. Hannah spoke from farther down the table. "I got Jessica's text while she was locked in the supply room." Olivia turned toward her. "Hannah, you brought it up." "I didn't bring up the supply room." "No," Hannah said. "You left that part out." Mom put a hand on the table. "Enough." I looked at Hannah. She continued anyway. "I was standing with Madison near the ceremony doors. Jessica texted me before the processional started and said you had locked her in the supply room. She told me to ask Madison whether Madison had been told she stepped aside." Aunt Denise stared at Olivia. "You locked her in?" Olivia's face flushed. "It was 10 minutes. Dad, who had been quiet until then, looked up. "You admitted it that day." Olivia turned to him. "Dad, not you too. I was standing in the hallway." You know why it happened. Dad's jaw tightened. I know what you said. Olivia looked back at me. You were making a scene before the ceremony. No, you were. What scene? You kept bringing up childhood stuff? Hannah asked me about dance practice. You were making yourself the center of everything. Hannah shook her head. That wasn't what happened. Olivia laughed sharply. Of course you'd say that now. That was the moment I realized she might deny the locked room incident itself if the conversation continued long enough. So I gave her one more chance. Olivia, are you saying I was not locked in that supply room? I'm saying you're exaggerating what happened. I pulled out my phone. Mom looked at me. Jessica, don't. I met her eyes. She just said I'm exaggerating. This does not need to happen here. She chose here. I opened the email from the venue manager. I did not read the whole thing. I did not stand up. I did not announce that I had documentary evidence. I simply said, the venue manager confirmed in writing that their coordinator was told a guest was unable to exit the secure supply room, that the manager opened it with a spare key, and that the processional was paused while they resolved it. Olivia stared at me. You emailed the venue? Yes. For what, evidence? For a factual record. That is insane. No, what would have been insane was trusting this family to keep the story unchanged. Mom looked wounded. I wished that did not affect me. It still did. Madison spoke quietly. I was lied to. Mom turned toward her. Madison, nobody is saying what Olivia did was right. That isn't what I said. I'm trying to keep this from becoming bigger than it needs to be. Madison gave her a tired look. It became big when she used me. Olivia pushed back from the table. I did not use you. You told me Jessica volunteered because you knew I wouldn't agree otherwise. You would have made it a problem. That's exactly the point. People at neighboring tables had not started staring. We were in a private enough section, and nobody was shouting. But within our family table, the polished version of the evening had vanished. Aunt Denise looked at me. Jessica, why didn't you just tell us all this after the wedding? Because I didn't want to spend 6 months campaigning for people to believe me. Olivia laughed. That's what you're doing now. No. I'm correcting what you just said. You brought an email. I brought my phone. The email happens to be on it. You've been saving things. Yes. She stared at me as if that were worse than the things I had saved. Uncle Ray cleared his throat. I'll say one thing. I looked toward him. He had been the relative at Thanksgiving who reminded everyone that Mom and Dad had worked themselves nearly sick, keeping the restaurant alive. I still think people are making too much of those years when Jessica helped, he said. Your parents were doing what they had to do. All families lean on older kids some. Mom seemed relieved someone had said it. Olivia did too. I nodded. I know. Ray looked surprised. I'm not asking anyone to call Mom and Dad monsters. Mom's eyes met mine. I'm not asking anyone to say I raised Olivia. I didn't. The table was silent. I turned toward my sister. What I am asking is that Olivia stop telling people I was never there, because admitting I was there makes the day I left hurt more. Olivia's face changed. That was the first moment all evening, when I saw something underneath the anger. Fear. Then it disappeared. You really think you understand everything, don't you? No. You think because you remembered a few car rides and dinners you get to explain my entire childhood? No. You want everyone here to think you made me. There it was. I shook my head. You don't owe me who you became. Then why does everyone keep talking like you saved me? Nobody here said I saved you. They don't have to use that word. Her voice rose for the first time. Every story is Jessica drove me here. Jessica helped me with that. Jessica took care of this. Do you know what that sounds like after 20 years? Yes. No, you don't. It sounds like people are giving me credit you think belongs to you. She stopped. I continued. And they shouldn't. Olivia blinked. I mean that. You finished school. You built your career. You made your friendships. You built your marriage. You don't owe me any of that. Then stop talking about what you did. I'm not asking for credit. You are. I need you to stop using a lie to justify how you treat me now. Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed hard. You left me. I was 22. You always say that like it makes me stupid for being hurt. I have never said you were stupid for being hurt. You left. Yes. And everyone still acts like you were some perfect sister. I wasn't. Then say it. I was impatient. I liked being needed more than I admitted. Sometimes I was bossy because I thought being older meant I knew better. When I moved, I probably pulled away emotionally faster than you were ready for. Olivia stared at me. I continued. None of those things make the supply room disappear. Mom finally said, "That is enough." I turned toward her. Her eyes were bright with anger and embarrassment. "You have made your point." Aunt Denise looked at her. "Marilyn, what? You didn't keep the peace." Mom stared at her. Denise's voice stayed calm. "You picked the daughter who would complain less." Mom went pale. "That's unfair." "Maybe. But I watched you tell Jessica to let it go at Thanksgiving. I'm watching you do it again now." Mom looked at Dad as if expecting him to rescue her. For most of my life, Dad would have. He would have said everyone had a point. He would have reminded us it was Olivia's birthday. He would have asked whether we could move forward. Instead, he looked at Olivia. "You locked Jessica in that room." Olivia froze. Dad continued. "That was wrong." She waited. "So did I." I knew the sentence that usually came next. "But you were emotional." "But Jessica could have handled it differently." "But we all need to move on." It did not come. Dad said, "We need to stop changing the story." Olivia looked like he had slapped her. Mom looked almost as shocked. I felt no triumph, only relief. For once, a fact had been allowed to stand without someone immediately softening it for the person who caused it. The rest of dinner was strained, but surprisingly controlled. Mom brought out the cake because refusing to do that would have turned the argument into another kind of punishment. We sang Happy Birthday. Olivia blew out the candles. Eric stayed beside her, but he barely spoke. Madison left shortly after cake. I stayed long enough to say goodbye to Dad and Hannah. I did not apologize. I did not repeat my evidence. I did not ask anyone whether they believed me now. When I stepped outside, the January air was cold enough to sting my face. I had almost reached my car when I heard the restaurant door open behind me. "Jessica." I turned. Olivia came toward me without her coat, arms crossed tightly against the cold. "You got what you wanted." I knew better than to answer that sentence emotionally. What did I want? Everyone thinks I'm a liar now. No. She laughed bitterly. "Really? They know you lied about this. What's the difference?" I looked at her. That question told me more than the entire dinner had. "To me," I said. "A lot." She shook her head. "You knew exactly what would happen." "No. I knew what happened at the wedding. I knew what you told Madison. I knew what Hannah saw. I knew what Dad heard. You're the one who decided to tell Aunt Denise I walked away. You could have let it go." "I did. For months. That's not letting it go if you're saving emails. Letting something go doesn't require me to agree when you change it." She stared at me. "You've turned everyone against me." "No. Madison barely speaks to me. Eric checks everything I tell him. Dad embarrassed me in there. Mom looks terrified every time we're in the same room. How is that not you getting revenge?" I wanted to tell her that revenge would have been easier. I could have sent screenshots in August. I could have told relatives before she did. I could have called Madison repeatedly. I could have made the entire wedding incident the center of every family gathering. Instead, I said, "I didn't tell Madison to stop trusting you. I didn't tell Eric to question you. I didn't make Dad say what he said. You started all of it." "No, you did." She looked away. For a moment, with her standing outside in a thin dress on a freezing January night, she looked younger than 31. Not innocent, just tired. "I was hurt," she said. "I know. You left. I know. You made me feel like I needed you, and then you left." That was closer to the truth than anything she had said in months. "I believe you." Her eyes came back to mine. "Then why can't you just understand?" "I do understand." "No, you don't. I understand why it hurt. I understand why Madison staying felt safer. I understand why you hate people giving me credit for your life." She said nothing. "But understanding why you did something doesn't require me to pretend you didn't do it." Her face hardened again. "You always have an answer." "Not anymore." "What's that supposed to mean?" It means I don't know how to make you see the difference between being hurt and being entitled to rewrite another person. She stared at me, and I'm done trying to explain it. I turned toward my car. Behind me, Olivia said, "You really think you're better than me?" I looked back. No. And for once, I did not add anything, because by then I understood the one thing I could not fix for my sister. I could tell the truth. I could refuse the lie. I could stop carrying consequences that belonged to her. But I could not make Olivia grow up around a truth she still needed to fight. Madison ended her friendship with Olivia 3 days after the birthday dinner. I did not hear it through Mom, Hannah, or the family grapevine. Madison called me herself because she wanted me to hear it before Olivia turned the ending into another story about me. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," she said before I could even respond. I was standing in my kitchen after work, staring into an open refrigerator without seeing anything inside it. I closed the door and sat down. "What happened?" I told her I can't keep doing this. "Doing what?" "Being her best friend while she uses me as proof against you." Madison sounded exhausted rather than angry. That made the call harder. "She asked whether I believed she was a liar," Madison continued. I told her that wasn't the point. I said I could forgive panic. I could forgive one terrible decision. What I can't do is stay friends with someone who keeps using me to punish somebody else, and then blames me when I notice. "What did Olivia say?" "That you got what you wanted." I closed my eyes. "Of course she did. She thinks I chose you," Madison said. "You didn't. I know. You barely know me." That's what I told her. Despite everything, I laughed. Madison did too, briefly. Then she became quiet again. "I'm done discussing her with you after this." "Good." "Good?" "Yes, I don't want us turning into two people whose only connection is Olivia." "Exactly." Before we hung up, I told her I was sorry the friendship had ended. She asked if some part of me was relieved. I considered lying. "Yes," I said. "Part of me is. I understand. But I'm not happy." That distinction mattered to me. I was relieved that Olivia could no longer use Madison as a living symbol of the sister who supposedly replaced me. I was relieved someone else finally saw how she shaped stories. But losing a friendship of more than a decade was real damage. I did not need to enjoy it for the consequence to feel deserved. After we hung up, I did something that would once have felt impossible. Nothing. I did not call Olivia. I did not call Mom. I did not ask Hannah what she thought. I let Madison's decision belong to Madison and Olivia. A week later, Olivia called me. "Can I come over?" Her voice was tired, not angry. "To talk about what?" "Us." That answer was specific enough. She arrived 40 minutes later wearing jeans, a heavy coat, and no makeup. She looked nothing like the bride who had stared at me from the hallway 6 months earlier while the ceremony music sat silent behind closed doors. I let her in. We sat across from each other in my living room. "How's Eric?" I asked. Her expression tightened. "Mom told you?" "She told me you were in counseling. I didn't ask for details." Olivia looked at her wedding ring. "We're still going." I nodded. "He doesn't trust what I tell him anymore." "That sounds painful." She looked up sharply. "You're not going to say I deserve it?" "No. You think it. I think he has a reason to ask questions. That's different." She looked away. "If I say Mom said something, he asks what she actually said. If I tell him about a fight with somebody, he asks what happened before the part I'm telling him. He never used to do that." For a moment, I almost felt sorry enough to soften everything. Then I remembered why he had started checking. Olivia had told Madison I volunteered to give up my role. She told Dad I was upset, and she made a last-minute change. She told Aunt Denise I walked away because I could not handle Madison being important. Each version placed Olivia in the emotional position she needed at that moment. Together, they could not all be true. "Does Eric think you lie all the time?" I asked. "No." "What does he think?" "He says I frame things." That was painfully accurate. Olivia saw my expression. "Don't." I didn't say anything. "You didn't have to." "Fair." She pulled off her coat and folded it beside her. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I knew you did those things." I frowned. "What things?" "When we were kids. The driving, dinner, homework, picking me up." I waited. I knew. I believe you. No. I mean, I knew while I was telling people I basically raised myself. There was no satisfaction in hearing her admit it. What were you trying to erase? I wasn't trying to erase you. That's what it became. She stood and walked toward the window. I wanted people to stop acting like I belonged to you. You never belonged to me. I know. Then what did they say? She turned around. They said everything through you. Olivia stayed with dance because Jessica drove her. Olivia did well in school because Jessica helped her. Olivia was responsible because Jessica taught her. You were always the example. That last word changed the conversation. The example? Yes. Be organized like Jessica. Jessica already filled out her form. Jessica remembered her shoes. Jessica knows how to handle it. Do you know how annoying that was? I thought about how often adults had praised me in front of Olivia. I had liked it. That was the uncomfortable truth. I probably enjoyed some of that. She looked surprised. I liked being considered capable, I said. I liked being trusted. I liked being needed more than I admitted. So you admit it. I admit that. I don't admit the wedding story you invented afterward. Her face tightened, but she did not fight the distinction. I hated people talking like you were the reason I turned out okay. I know. No, I really hated it. I believe you. It made my whole life feel like it had a footnote. That image finally made the resentment clear. Whatever relatives intended, Olivia heard every memory of me helping as proof that part of her adulthood belonged to me. You don't owe me your life because I drove you to dance class. She looked at me. You don't owe me your degree, your career, your marriage, your friends, or the person you became. None of that belongs to me. Her eyes filled. I know. But you don't get to erase me so your life feels more like yours. She looked down. For once, she had no immediate counter-argument. I thought if people stopped talking about you like that, I'd stop feeling like I owed you. You never owed me. I didn't know that. You could have told me. She laughed bitterly. You think 16-year-old me could explain any of this? No. Then what? I think 31-year-old you could have told me you didn't want me opening the ceremony doors before you locked me in a supply room. She winced. I panicked. I know. I thought you'd argue. I probably would have asked why. That's what I mean. No. Asking you to explain yourself is not the same as refusing. She rubbed her forehead. I know that now. That was one of the first things she had said that sounded like responsibility rather than defense. I did not rush to reward it. Our family had spent years treating Olivia's smallest admission as the end of an argument. I was not doing that anymore. I don't know how to fix this, she said. My old reflex woke up instantly. I could tell her what to say to Madison. I could help her structure an apology. I could explain what Eric probably needed. I could tell Mom how to back off. For a few seconds, I saw the whole plan. Then I let it disappear. Don't fix everything. She frowned. What does that mean? Do the next right thing. That sounds like therapy. Maybe therapy is useful. What's the next right thing? Stop changing stories because one version feels better. She looked down. If you tell somebody the wedding story wrong, correct it. Keep going to counseling with Eric. Let Madison have the distance she asked for. Her face tightened at Madison's name. And stop using me as the explanation for every other person you're angry with. What does that mean? If Mom compared you to me, be angry at Mom. If relatives made you feel like your accomplishments belonged to me, tell them. Stop making me responsible for every comparison somebody else made. Olivia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You always have rules. No. I finally have boundaries. She rolled her eyes, but there was almost no heat in it. We're not going back to normal, I said. I know. I'm not going to mediate between you and Mom. Fine. I'm not talking to Madison for you. I know. And if you tell people again that I walked away from the wedding role, I'll correct it. She looked at me. I know. When she left, we hugged. It was awkward and brief, but it was real. I did not mistake it for reconciliation. For once, I let a relationship be partly repaired without forcing it to become healed. Dad handled things more directly. He asked me to meet him for coffee on a Saturday morning. When I arrived, he already had my drink waiting. We talked about work first. Then he looked down at his hands. I owe you something. I waited. You were a kid too. 4 words. My eyes filled so quickly I had to look toward the window. Dad kept going. I don't mean you were helpless, you weren't. That was part of the problem. I laughed softly. That makes sense. You were capable, so every time you handled something, it got easier to hand you the next thing. I swallowed. Yes. We should have noticed. Yes. He nodded. I'm sorry. I did not tell him it was fine. It had not been fine. I also did not tell him he had ruined my childhood. He had not. We were doing the best we could, he said. The sentence used to end every conversation. This time he added something. And sometimes our best still put too much on you. I looked at him. That's all I wanted you to understand. I do now. A week later, Dad called me in the evening. How was your week? I waited. What broke? He laughed. Nothing. Who missed an appointment? No one. Then why are you calling? To ask how your week was. I sat down on the edge of my bed. That's it? That's it. That conversation meant more to me than I expected. For years, calls from my family had trained my body to prepare for work. What needs fixing? What was forgotten? Who was upset? That night, my father simply wanted me. Not my calendar. Not my competence. Mom took longer. That did not surprise me. She had spent years running our family through invisible assignments. Dad provided. Olivia needed more reassurance. Jessica handled things. Mom called that balance. Once I stopped doing my part automatically, she had to confront how much of that balance had depended on free labor. By February, she and Dad hired a part-time administrative assistant at the restaurant 3 mornings a week. Mom complained about the cost. 9 hours a week, she said when I visited one Sunday. Half of what she does is phone calls. Apparently those phone calls were work. Mom looked at me. I smiled. The assistant handled scheduling, vendor paperwork, service appointments, reminders, and the small administrative tasks Mom used to send my way whenever the restaurant became too busy. Nothing dramatic. Just work someone now had to be paid to do. The spare key was still on my ring. I had barely used it in months, but I kept delaying the moment of giving it back because I worried it would look theatrical. Then one afternoon I realized keeping it had become its own kind of avoidance. Mom and I were sitting at her kitchen table while she complained about the administrative assistant. I took the little brass key off my ring and placed it beside her coffee. She stopped. What's that? You know. Why are you giving it back? Because I don't live here. Her expression tightened. You've had that key for years. I know. What if there's an emergency? Dad has a key. Olivia lives closer. You have neighbors. That isn't the point. What is? She stared at the key. So, we're not family now? I almost smiled. We're family. Then why return it? Because being family doesn't mean I'm on call. I never said you were. You didn't have to. She looked hurt. I let her. That was still one of the hardest lessons. Someone feeling hurt by my boundary did not automatically make the boundary wrong. Mom picked up the key. Your father is going to lose this. Make him a copy. She shook her head. You always have an answer. Not always. She turned the key over in her fingers. I have a repair company coming Thursday. I looked at her. She looked back. For 1 second, the entire old system sat between us. Then Mom raised a hand. Don't. I didn't say anything. You were going to. I really wasn't. She laughed, despite herself. Fine. Can you be home Thursday? No. I'm having lunch with Denise. Then you'll need to handle that. Mom rolled her eyes. You enjoy saying that. A little. She laughed again. That laugh mattered because she had finally heard a boundary without translating it into abandonment. Olivia and I settled into low contact. Sometimes she texted first. Sometimes I did. She and Eric stayed in counseling. I never asked what happened there. Once she told me trust was slower now. I told her that sounded reasonable. She said she hated when I was reasonable. I told her she had hated worse things about me. She laughed. Madison did not return to the friendship. Later, Hannah told me Olivia had sent her an apology. I did not ask what it said. That was between them. Some relatives treated Olivia differently after the birthday dinner. Not cruelly, carefully. If she described a conflict, people sometimes asked what had happened before the part she was telling. If she said Mom attacked her, somebody might ask what Mom actually said. Olivia hated it. I understood why. She had spent years believing trust meant people accepted the emotional shape of her story. Now people check the edges. That was probably the consequence she felt most. Nothing spectacular happened. No one went bankrupt. Eric did not file for divorce the next morning. No police arrived. No lawyer threatened anyone. The restaurant stayed open. The consequences were quieter than that. Madison left. Eric questioned. Dad admitted. Mom adapted. Olivia lost the ability to control every version without someone asking whether the details matched. And I stopped being the person who cleaned up whatever remained. Which brings me back to the February morning when Mom sat at my kitchen table with a folder. Dad had missed an appointment. There was a renewal notice. A repair company needed calling. Olivia was not answering. Mom pushed the folder toward me. This family has been falling apart since the wedding. I pushed it back. Then you should probably start handling it. She stared at the folder. Your father's going to forget that appointment. Probably. You could remind him. I could. She waited. I took a sip of coffee. I'm not going to. Mom shook her head. You really changed. No. She raised an eyebrow. I think I stopped confusing being useful with being responsible. For once, Mom did not argue. She put the folder back in her bag. A few days later, she called me. For years, seeing her name on my phone would have started an automatic checklist. What happened? Who needs help? Do I need to leave work? What deadline did somebody forget? This time, nothing happened. I answered. Hi, Mom. Are you free Sunday? For what? Dinner. I waited. That's it? That's it. I smiled. Maybe. I'll let you know. There was a short pause. Then she said, Okay. No guilt. No reminder that family came first. Just okay. After we hung up, I put my phone down and went back to what I had been doing. There was no crisis waiting for me. No invisible assignment. No need to prove I loved anyone by making their responsibilities disappear. For most of my life, whenever somebody in my family had a problem, my answer had been the same. I've got it. Sometimes those words meant I was strong. Sometimes they meant I was generous. Sometimes they meant I loved somebody. But sometimes they meant I was taking ownership of a problem before the person it belonged to had even tried. It took my sister locking me behind a door at her wedding for me to understand the difference. That supply room door opened in less than 10 minutes. The harder one took months. It was the door between helping because I chose to and helping because everyone expected me to. When I finally walked through that one, I did not leave my family behind. I simply stopped carrying them with me. You can love your family and still refuse to carry responsibilities that do not belong to you. Being dependable is a strength. But when people start treating your competence like an unlimited resource, helping can quietly turn into obligation. You do not need to prove your love by fixing every mistake, calming every argument, remembering every deadline, or protecting someone from consequences they created themselves. You are allowed to say no, even when the task would be easy for you, because another person's inconvenience does not automatically become your duty. You should also remember that pain can explain bad behavior without excusing it. Someone may genuinely feel abandoned, overlooked, or compared to you. But those feelings do not give them the right to rewrite your history, lie about your actions, or punish you for choices you had every right to make. When a family conflict becomes distorted, protect yourself with facts, clear communication, and consistent boundaries rather than revenge for revenge's sake. You do not have to destroy anyone to defend yourself. Sometimes the strongest response is simply refusing to clean up the damage they caused. Most importantly, do not confuse being needed with being valued. Healthy relationships should still exist when you stop solving problems for everyone else. If this story reminded you to protect your time, your truth, and your boundaries, subscribe to the channel for more stories about family conflict, hard choices, accountability, and the moments when finally saying no changes everything.